Come and get it.
Wednesday, July 10th on Comedy Central.
All right, Beavis, I have another idea. What is it? I don't know.
New Beavis.
I have broccolini in my bunghole.
New Butthead.
Now it's party time.
America's dumb best friends.
Empty your minds of all thought.
What?
Are back.
That cloud looks like a butt. Yeah, it's a butt in the sky. Let the games begin.
New Beavis and Butthead. Wednesday, July 10th at 10 on Comedy Central.
Chicks, here we come.
This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Been running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
A really fun word we get to use when an eclipse happens is syzygy. Syzygy! Syzygy!
Why does it get dark at night? Surely when the sun goes down, we have to make do with the feeble reflected light from the moon, and the even more feeble light from the distant planets and stars. But the answer is actually more subtle and interesting than that. It's known today as Olber's paradox.
Sometimes the moon is a little bit closer to us, and sometimes it's a little bit further away. And when a full moon happens while the moon is close to us, at perigee, some folks call that a supermoon.
So what's up with Boeing's Starliner? Is it really stuck at the International Space Station? In short, Starliner is not stuck. The crew, Butch Wilmore and Sony Williams, are not stranded in space. The vehicle is safe, and the astronauts do not require a rescue by a SpaceX Crew Dragon. So what's with all the dramatic headlines?
Well, those are a few of the subjects that we will be tackling with Dr. Sky, the man who has the knowledge and the voice, and the man who we're privileged every 2 weeks to be able to join for some cosmic conversations.
The Other Side of Midnight presents... From the spiral to the elliptical to the lenticular to the irregular to the quasars, galaxies. Where are we in the cosmic evolutionary picture? Always remember to keep your eyes to the skies. The following conversations are cosmic conversations with Steve Cates, a.k.a. Dr. Sky.
Steve, there are a lot of questions to be asked. There are questions about supermoons. There are questions about Russian satellites exploding in space, this incredible Boeing settlement, the Boeing Starliner. But I really have to begin with following up with an SMS text message you sent me yesterday. You sent me a screenshot of the thermometer on your mobile phone. I thought this must have been a different temperature scale than I was familiar with. 126 degrees. Are you now broadcasting from the surface of the sun itself?
Right now in Phoenix, Arizona, the temperature still stands at this hour. We're a little after 10 p.m. We're about 107 degrees Fahrenheit. So the other day, driving around, very difficult to do that in this heat. No vehicle survives these temperatures easily. There's a lot of people with dead batteries. But the temperature I sent you is real, but it was even topped higher in an area to the west of us, which is called Lake Havasu. They had a record temperature there, or a high temperature, I should say, 124. So this experience is going on not only here in Arizona, but all over North America at this time.
Now, when I first started working with Joe Piscopo on a regular basis, he lives in a section of New Jersey where there are bears, and bears would come to his garbage. And to me, as a lifelong resident of, the big city, I would ask him, Joe, why would you ever want to live in an area where there are bears? I have the same question for you. Once it gets over 110, 120 degrees, what are you doing? That's not a place to live. That's a dystopian science fiction movie.
Well, Frank, as right as you are, I've been out here. I'm a native New Yorker, obviously, but I'm out here about 35 years. But you're right. You I hate to use this expression, kind of get used to it. But there's a real benefit on the other side of the coin. When we move into the season here in fall, and we move into winter, we get what many people, I don't like the term, they call them snowbirds, people coming from Canada and northern climates. We just say we welcome you to Arizona. But the reality is, no, it's pretty brutal. I mean, you have to plan your day out here by doing things right around the sunrise hour, which for many of us now is just right around 5:30 in the morning. And then probably by 9 a.m., the temperatures shot up here well over 100. But, everybody's air conditioned, it seems, the malls, different areas. And, of course, here in Phoenix and many cities, we have these places for habitation where people can go to get out of the heat. This is something which wasn't done a long time ago. So there's kind of like safe houses to protect you, which rightfully people need water, and particularly I feel for the animals. I mean, we have a beautiful little Bichon dog. Her name's Aurora, obviously no pun intended to the sky, but here's the point. Can you imagine many people take their animal out? And I know Curtis and Nancy talk about that with the Animal Welfare Hour. We don't want to see our poor little animals. Imagine if we walked with no shoes out on the asphalt. I mean, imagine poor little animals. So we have to take that into consideration, too.
I guess we do. If people are just tuning in, you are in for a real treat this hour because my guest is Steve Cates, or as we affectionately call him, Dr. Sky. He is a veteran radio and TV broadcaster, an edutainer with expertise in astronomy and space, and he does a terrific podcast called The Dr. Sky Experience. You can check it out at redapplepodcastnetwork.com, or you can just search Dr. Sky Experience wherever you get your podcast. Steve, let me begin with this. We've been talking a lot about the problems at Boeing, and we're going to talk about the Starliner coming up in a few minutes. But big news this week in Boeing agreeing to plead guilty to fraud in these 737 MAX crashes. No prison time, but they're going to have to pay a big chunk of money, and they're going to have a federal monitor for a few years. Some of the family members that died in these Boeing 737 MAX crashes, they don't necessarily think this is a sufficient punishment. Can you break this down for us, Steve? What exactly is Boeing pleading guilty to? What did they do? And from your perspective, do you think this punishment is too much, too little, or just about right?
Well, it all centers around this MCAS system, which is, in other words, in one of these obviously more advanced than basically fly-by-wire. And it's caused, damage, obviously deaths, which is even more severe. But the reality of this is Boeing has tried their best to so-called find the culprit behind this. There was a lot of blame going on, certain companies, there were subcontractors, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. But right now we're hearing, obviously, they admit to this, and I think it's long in coming that they should. But it's so sad because look at the deaths that happened with these particular early versions of the MAX 8 jet series. And a lot of this also has to do with the level of pilot training that was given. So many people are alleging that there wasn't enough and sufficient pilot training to talk about these more advanced systems. But Frank, I go back to something even more basic. I've said this before, maybe not to be redundant on this particular program, but talking with other people just over conversations and coffee. Why don't we just have a system, or maybe I don't know this, where if we have trouble with this electronic technology, particularly in aircraft, that we can just flip a switch. I know that sounds kind of too simplistic, and just go back to simple control of, stick and rudder on these particular aircraft. It's great to have technology, but don't you think you'd want the backup? And of course, that's a ridiculous statement because it's obvious we really do. So hopefully, things can improve here. I'm putting it very mildly. I'm not an attorney, but for the suffering that the families went through for the loss of loved ones, that's heinous, and obviously the fines, I think, are appropriate to hopefully change that whole culture of what was going on behind the scenes.
So in response to my question, it sounds like you think this penalty is just about where it should be in terms of taking a guilty plea.
I think so, Frank, but like I said, since I'm not an attorney and I really don't get into those issues, I'll just say it this way, that if it was anybody that I was close to, family member, just like those people who suffered loss, I think maybe, unfortunately, these kind of things, it always boils down to money and settlements. Maybe that's the answer. But at this point in time, let's move on forward so that we can correct this. And once more, not to be overly redundant, do we have, I don't know this, is there a way on these aircraft that we can simply go back to controlling the aircraft with the old technology that I think is pretty much reliable? Ask great aviators that have flown, Chuck Yeager and all these other people of the old school days, Bob Hoover, one of the greatest stick and rudder men of all time, he passed on. But I'm sure they would look at this with great contempt and say, hell, we need to have the control of these aircraft in a way that if we need it, we need to be responsible to override those.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like common sense. I'm a little amazed that that's not already the case. But you ask a very good question. I'm going to look into that further. By the way, if people have questions for Dr. Sky at any point this hour, either on any of the subjects that we're talking about or anything involving space, aviation, or looking up in general, you can give us a call at 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635 and be part of our cosmic conversations. I'm going to move on from the Boeing settlement, but I do want to play this because I think this underscores what you're saying about where you stand depends on where you sit.
Sure.
Here is the daughter of one of the Boeing crash victims. Her name is Zipporah Kuria, talking about this settlement with Boeing. And this was yesterday after it was announced that this was going to be the guilty plea and this was going to be the penalty. Apparently, she thinks...
I think that when people are not held accountable, you're setting a standard of what you can get away with.
Yeah, so we'll see where it goes. Right. Steve, obviously there's been a lot of news related to Russia and the tensions that the United States is experiencing with Russia. Apparently, a Russian satellite has exploded in space. What happened and how big of a cause for concern is this?
Well, actually, Frank, this is an interesting story. It adds insult to injury on the subject matter of space debris. And we know, at least our Space Force and other, observers around the world state that on June the 26th, a so-called Russian spy Earth sensing satellite called Resurs P1. It mysteriously explodes in space. Now, it gets worse. Well, when you explode something in space, nobody has the exact count of debris, but allegedly up to about 180 pieces of material come off this particular spacecraft, naturally. Lots of metal, and even particles a few centimeters, maybe even millimeters in diameter, are floating around in low Earth orbit. Now, the ISS gets the warning, and what do? They have to go into this mode, which is kind of like, stand by and maybe move into some of the habitation modules where if they had to, move away from the space station, they could. And that includes the Starliner, even though we'll talk about that later. But this is very interesting. The Russians, we don't know for sure if they did something and performed what's called a passivation process. Simply that means they would deplete any fuel on board or anything other toxic materials, in tanks, pressurization, propulsion. We don't know if they did that. We don't even know if they even had time to do it. But the net effect of this is it actually had the space station move itself because both of these objects, not knowing the exact altitude of Resurs, but knowing the space station around 260 miles up. Can you imagine, Frank, if you had an incoming field of debris, even though it looks so tiny, the collision is most catastrophic, and that would be horrible. So we talk about this on a much larger scale because with all of the record numbers of launches now, with SpaceX and other great companies, all doing some interesting things in space, I'm sure we would agree. But there's a phenomenon that an aerospace engineer a long time ago with the last name Kessler, he called it the Kessler syndrome. And this is way before we had sons of objects in space. And he said, be careful what you wish for in low Earth orbit. And here it is. The Kessler syndrome would say that all the pieces, maybe one explodes, they hit another one like billiard balls on a pool table, and that whole thing cascades into a never-ending series of collisions. So we have an issue here with low Earth orbit, and it really hasn't been adjudicated or figured out as to what we're going to do. Do we need a large space vacuum? Maybe so. There are technologies out there that are trying to help with that, but that's what's happened with the Resurs. Now, we don't really know. Was that an intentional deployment in space? I don't want to go, conspiracy on it. I don't know. But that's an interesting story. It's happened before, and I'm sure, based on what we just discussed, will happen again.
I just want to reiterate what you're saying about the difficulty of the space debris problem as it is now. I mean, we're just kind of getting our head around how to handle pollution on this Earth. We saw when you did away with certain chemicals that the hole in the ozone layer did get repaired. We saw the progress that was made on things like acid rain. You don't hear about acid rain anymore because we were able to figure that out. There's some other stuff on this planet in terms of clean air and clean water that we're in the midst of trying to figure out. But what you're saying as of now with existing technology, there's not necessarily an easy to point to way to suck up all this space debris. It's just floating out there all around our atmosphere in space.
Absolutely. And NASA has been tracking, Space Command, the old Cheyenne Mountain, and I'm sure the Space Force and other nations' space forces are tracking debris. They used to have the story about a glove in space or particles when I used to interview with Dr. Story Musgrave, one of the astronauts that fixed the Hubble Space Telescope. He would tell me off record that, I lost a couple of nuts and bolts and screws up there and they were floating around. So anything like that, it's multiplying itself in a logarithmic way. In other words, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, no, it's growing in a much bigger and voluminous, manner. So that's something we have to watch out for. And Frank, another side note to this is we've observed this in Arizona. Recent space launches, mostly not necessarily just SpaceX, other companies, when those rockets go up, they're pretty exciting to see here in the West Coast at night. But here it is. They're punching holes temporarily in the ionosphere. So that could also have a deleterious effect on the future of the ionosphere. So the problematic thing is, what are we going to do to create a, almost debris field, free debris field up in space, which sounds almost impossible to do. And if, God forbid, we go to war in space, the whole reasons behind Space Force and other countries, this may be the smallest of stories. But in one day, if there was ever conflict in space, that could really upset the entire apple cart in space satellites, technology, and look at all the money that's involved in maintaining these important platforms from surveillance, communication, and the beat goes on. There you go. You
said a minute ago that, you didn't want to sound conspiratorial. Some people may wonder if this was intentional on the part of the Russians. What would let's for the sake of argument, let's say that that's the case. What would the Russians gain from exploding a satellite? How does that help them or hurt any of their adversaries?
Well, it's one of the most primitive ways of looking at, what the cause and effect is. But if that were intentional, it's pretty simple. We've seen this before. China has had instances. Russia has also intentionally ASAT'd a satellite in space, and I believe China has. What I mean by ASAT, they had a ground-based missile to shoot something in space and create a debris. It was a Chinese meteorological satellite. But what's interesting about this is, what would they gain from it? I guess they would just take a look at it and see how quickly it would take out assets in space. But I think it's really ridiculous, for them to do that or admit it, obviously, because now you're the culprit and you're starting what I consider to be a simple act of war. Don't you think? That's sad.
Really interesting. All right. 646-720-0635. 646-720-0635. My guest for the hour is the one and only Dr. Sky Steve Cates. Let me begin with Al in New York City. Hello there, Al.
Hey, good morning, Dr. Cates, Mr. Morano. I have a question. Hey, by the way, do you know that in your very state, it's going to be 58 degrees tonight, 40 degrees difference? Can you believe it, in one state?
Yes, and also to add to this, Al, it's very interesting. We have a place up in the mountains, and thank God it's kind of an escape hatch for us here. But it's up there where you're saying, right, the temperature difference can be 118 in the desert or 124 at Lake Havasu. But in the mountains of Arizona, the low temperatures in the morning, which I didn't want to leave after having my second cup of coffee, was right, around 58 to 60 degrees. So what a difference in climate, don't you think, Al? That's amazing.
Amazing, yeah. My question was this. If they were able to harness solar panels in space, would they get a continued flow, and could they return that energy continuously to, like, maybe out in the desert places to collect it. I've heard it's possible, but wondering if that's true. And also, the nukes that they do have there up in space, how are they cooled? How do they keep their cores cooled?
Well, let's start off with the first one, with the solar panels. This is interesting, Al. Obviously, spacecraft going on the Earth see a sunrise and sunset every 45 minutes. But there are now new technologies out there where if you set up maybe even a geosynchronous satellite, meaning one that just sits there and follows the rotation of the Earth, there's technologies now to talk about how to transfer that light energy, which is in the form of, the solar energy collection, into microwaves or something where you could beam it down to the Earth. Sounds like science fiction. But the interesting story about that is that's really way up into the future, my guesstimate, because I don't think that's going to happen. But as far as the second part, anything that has this nuclear type of material, they would go back to the Voyager spacecraft. There was a lot of controversy when they launched it in Cassini because they said, well, this plutonium dust that you're using, what if the spacecraft blew up? Would that contaminate the Earth? But in space like that, unless we have a true nuclear reactor, I'm not familiar with where there's a nuclear reactor yet in space, the obviously cooling process would be very similar to how we cool, reactors here on the Earth. You'd need a large water flow, H2O, and the problematic thing there is how do you compartmentalize that and make it small enough? That would be great technology. But Al, in closing, fusion technology would be the way to go. And that's really into the distant future. Thanks,
Al, thank you. 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. This is Cosmic Conversations. Every 2 weeks, we transform into a show that explores what you see in the night sky. And whether you're on the ground or looking up, there's going to be some interesting things to see within the next week or two. We're going to tell you what they are straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Economists warn that massive tax hikes could devastate your IRA and 401k as the stock market braces for impact. I'm Larry Kudlow, and I urge you to fortify your savings with physical gold with my friends at Priority Gold. To learn how gold and silver can help diversify your savings, please call 1-800-405-GOLD or just visit PriorityGold.com to get a free gold information guide. That's 1-800-405-GOLD.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Blue moon, you saw me standing alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own. Blue moon, you knew just what I was there for. You heard me saying a prayer for.
30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight, Cosmic Conversations edition, where I am joined for the hour by Dr. Sky, Steve Cates, as he's also known. That was, of course, the great Dean Martin singing about a blue moon. Well, if he was making music these days, and maybe there is an AI software that is able to create this song in his voice, he might be singing about a super moon, because if you haven't yet seen a super moon, there are still some opportunities to do so this year. Steve, give us a reminder first as to what a super moon is, and tell us when we should be on the lookout for these.
Well, the story of supermoon is really an astrological term. It's astronomy world really can't take credit for it, but here it goes. When the moon appears to be within some 90% of its perigee, or closest point to the Earth during a calendar month, we have this position where we can theoretically and then factually call it a supermoon. So I think, in my humble opinion, one of the most beautiful romantic ways to celebrate a night is just the calmness and serenity of people going out into the sky. I mean, the beat goes on, but here it is. What we're going to see here are 4 supermoons for the rest of 2024. The next full moon that we have is not one, which occurs on the 21st at 6:17 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, even though you won't see the moon at that time. That's when it's at that locked-in position called the full buck or thunder moon. But here we go with the supermoons. Get set for August the 19th, when we have the full sturgeon moon, the full super sturgeon moon. Then we move on to what I think is the most beautiful of all. So many songs have been written about it. And in the old days, let's say in the 1920s and 30s, the beautiful super harvest moon that occurs on September the 17th. And you go back into the annals, that is, when people dressed up and they had these great events and the harvest moon ball. That's going to be a beautiful night to view the moon. And then you move on into October when you get the full hunter's moon in October on the 17th. And finally, this year ends with another supermoon, the full super beaver moon on November the 15th. So what is the actual story and definition of a supermoon? It's a moon that'll be 14% larger to your eye, 30% brighter. And the closest of all these full moons, Frank, for this particular year is the supermoon. That's on October 17th, when the moon is only 221,979 miles, they tell us, from the Earth. It's a phenomenal time to view. And imagine if all politics could be done under the peace and tranquility of the beautiful moon, maybe things would get solved, in my humble opinion, a lot easier.
Well said. Well said. 646-720-0635. We'll resume with your phone calls in a moment. But one story that I thought was really fun and really interesting had to do with the crew of NASA's Earthbound simulated Mars habitat emerging after a year. The crew of a NASA mission to Mars basically emerged from their craft after a not real but simulated year-long voyage that never left Earth. Why, Steve, would these 4 volunteer crew members spend more than 12 months inside a simulated Mars environment? And what is a simulated Mars environment actually like?
Well, Frank, this crew should be given an award and their names should be put on a big plaque, because when we do go to Mars, these are the people who were the trendsetters. So down at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, you're right, these astronauts, with the quotations around astronauts, stayed inside a 17,000 square foot environment, not to come out to, take and visit their home, get their mail or what have you, literally over 378 days in what we call a confinement, simulating what a mission to the planet Mars would be like. And that's really amazing, because I don't know how well I would handle that, and you'd have to speak, of course, for yourself and the listeners. But this is important because we're taking away something here that, well, on that mission, they didn't have the ability to handle radiation in space and the other hazards. But he's really talking about the psychosis of what it's like to maybe do one of these missions. And how do humans experience this? So you give them a lot of credit, and there's also other missions like this where they have less of a confinement. I know they have, or they may still be doing one like in Hawaii, where they can actually come out in spacesuits, with oxygen tanks or even pretend oxygen tanks, because they can at least breathe. But you're in a full suit just to get an experience of what that mission would be like. But there's at JPL. Wow, I don't know how well I'd handle that one. How about you? What say you?
No, I'm not volunteering for that anytime soon, believe me.
You got it.
646-720-0635. Let me say hello to Dave in North Las Vegas. Hello there, Dave. Listening on K-Dawn.
K-Dawn. It just went below 100 degrees.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Good morning, Dave.
Good morning. Dr. Sky, from what my research says, there's 146 named moons in our solar system. How come our moon doesn't have a name?
Very interesting. It actually does in many ways. They called it Theia. And that was also something a long time ago, that one of the theories was that something hit it, but it's never been officiated. See, the International Astronomical Union, kind of like the UN of astronomy, they're the ones that have to go ahead and make that thing official. But sometimes people think, Dave, I don't know your opinion, but some people just say, hey, let's not change it, so let's just call it our moon or just the moon. But the controversy still continues out there about so many other objects. I wonder if they're ever going to run out of names, because mostly they're naming these after deities, Greek and Roman names, famous goddesses and gods of the heavens. But our moon, at one time, they had looked at the name Thea because that was something that may have hit the moon. That's a culprit that no longer exists. But it's very interesting. But I don't know. A lot of the friends that I have, they just like to call it the moon.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. 646-720-0635. All right, next, actually, in 2 days, my brother-in-law and co-sister-in-law are coming in from California from, they are from New York originally, at least my brother-in-law is, and yes. I couldn't think of a more opportune time for them to come back to New York because Manhattanhenge is coming up in just a couple of days. Remind us again, Steve, as to what Manhattanhenge is and why that's such a big deal.
Well, for the lucky observers in the New York area, I remember seeing this years ago when I lived over in New Jersey and also in Jackson Heights, Queens. We find out that on July the 12th at 8:21 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and also again on July 13th, 8:20 p.m., the east-west streets in New York City, the caverns, of these big buildings and some skyscrapers, we have the opportunity to see the sun literally coming down and descending into that canyon. So that those lucky people who get to see it, there's big celebrations on this. I haven't been to one of those. I don't know if you have, Frank, but to get lots of people cheering, it's almost like having a Stonehenge for the New York viewers and listeners. So that's amazing. That happens a couple of times a year. And why? Because of the alignment of where the sun would set in what we call azimuth. Take a circle 360 degrees, and it marks off at a certain time of year when the sun's disk. Remember, the sun's disk is literally a half of a degree in diameter against the background of the sky. So that will happen once again, July 12th, 8:21 p.m., July 13th, 8:20 p.m., and then we'll have to wait again as we move around the calendar and the the Earth races around the sun.
Well, it certainly is something to catch if you're in a position to do so. I definitely recommend people check it out. All right, 646-720-0635. Tony is in Clifton. Hey there, Tony.
Hi, Frank. Hi, Dr. Sky.
Good morning.
We're coming up on the 25th anniversary of the fateful trip that JFK Jr. made with his wife and his sister-in-law, which departed not far from me, another New Jersey incident in Fairfield. And then the fateful night, we lost him over the Massachusetts going over to Martha's Vineyard. And I just wanted to sort of think about him tonight and just take a minute and just talk about, what you can say about, I'll leave it to your discretion what you want to say about that night.
Well, God bless those souls that passed, because not knowing the whole background story of that, but they did blame it on pilot error, because in those particular situations, I don't know how much training or how many hours he had behind in the cockpit, but flying over those areas in that particular time, it could have been an instance where fog, you get some spatial disorientation. I mean, unless you're truly an instrument-rated pilot, and I'm not a pilot, so I'm always honest with the audience, but knowing so many that we fly with, that's a very sad moment in history. And I know there's a lot of other theories as to how that happened, but I'll stick to what I think is just the pure science and the sadness of the event. So, Tony, no, that's very sad, and we should never forget those that have perished in such a sad way.
Thank you, Tony. 646-720-0635. Talking with Dr. Sky. You can check out, if you like any of the subjects that we're talking about, if you're interested in them, check out the Dr. Sky Experience. Just type that into any podcast app, or just go to redapplepodcastnetwork.com. That's redapplepodcastnetwork.com. Steve, I heard a really interesting interview that you did with our boss, John Catsimatidis, the other day about what is going on with the Earth's core. Apparently, there's a big mystery involving the Earth's core actually reversing. How do we know it's reversing, and what does that mean for us?
Well, great question, Frank. We know less about the deep parts of the ocean and inside the Earth. But let's do a little geological story here in the mind's eye, since this is radio. You're standing on the Earth, looking down at your feet. You go through the Earth's crust, you go through the mantle, you go through a thing called the outer core, and then we move into this semi-solid nickel iron ball that's about 770 miles in diameter, maybe a little less than the size of Texas, that, believe it or not, this sounds like an incredible statement, but it's true, has the temperature of the surface of the sun. So some 3,963 miles below your feet is where all this activity takes place. So here's why things are heating up. We find out that scientists and geologists are saying that maybe in 2009, the Earth's inner core changed and reversed its direction. So how do we know that? Well, this is what they say, and not to get too technical here, they bounce waves through the Earth, and they measure these P waves or whatever through the center of the Earth. When they fire them or earthquakes send them back up, and they're noticing that there's a change or some kind of a delay. So let's go on to what this really means. Is there anything we should really be worried about the Earth's core, reversing? The scientists are saying this is like a 70-year cycle in which this happens. They didn't know this before. But here's something very interesting, and I spoke with Mr. Katzimatidis about this on his program. This is very interesting. If you look at a magnet and a compass on the Earth, there's a magnetic pole of the Earth, which is called the dip pole. And then there's the opposite one, which is just the geographic pole. So if you take a map and just line up latitude and longitude, and you go to 90 degrees. But here's something interesting. That dip pole, or the Earth's magnetic pole, has wandered. This is amazing. 683 miles since the year 1801, and it's now moving about 40 miles, each year from Canada to Siberia. So what's the big concern there? This is the one we should be concerned about. It is alleged that right in the North Polar region, there's two of these big blobs of magma, let's say, or heavier than what the material around the mantle is, that are distorting the compass because of magnetic changes and fluxes. But that's very interesting because, and here's another strange fact, if the Earth, as ridiculous as it sounds, the Earth rotates from west to east. So if the Earth just stopped rotating just for 1 second, remember at the equator we're going about 1,000 miles an hour from west to east. And look at this. No sci-fi movie could duplicate this, I guess, unless it was super CG. Everything not locked down in that 1 second would fly off the surface of the Earth, and all the water that's from the equator would simultaneously rush toward the poles. Now, that's not going to happen anytime soon. The Earth's rotation is not going to 1 second stop. But what they're saying is, on this 70-year cycle, the changes in rotation of the inner core may, of course, be making the Earth's day change. Now, it's minuscule. When I say this, not to get people alarmed at this hour of the morning, but it's microseconds of change in the time. So we're kind of lucky. And no, there's no magnetic reversal coming anytime soon. The last one happened 780,000 years ago. So at least for now, Frank, I think we have some luck on our side. At least that's what we hope.
Absolutely. 646-720-0635. David is on Staten Island. Hi, David.
Howdy. Dr. Sky, when I was at an orphanage, I was just telling the person that received a call, the moon looked like it was unusually large. I think to a kid, it's almost like it was another planet. I never heard of anything such as that. And the other thing I was bringing up is I have pictures. I got off their photographs, and one has NASA's logo on it, and it has two flying saucers in 1952. Another one, a picture, had the Enola Gay, which dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Bell X-1 at two F-86s. Could you give any information on that, the case of the reality of it?
Well, I've met Colonel Tibbets once, the pilot of the Enola Gay. I was lucky enough to sit and chat with him. But I've seen many of those pictures of the Enola Gay. But no, I can't put any, credibility yet. And again, I'm not the authority on this one, of any of UFOs actually being captured on the ground, standing next to or being next to any of these type of aircraft at that particular time. But let us not forget, I know Frank leads the charge on this in his program all the time, and rightfully so, that the mysteries out there with the whole UFO or UAPs is not a closed book, right, Frank? We're still open-minded, and we want to be, because somehow my simple belief is we ain't been told the truth on any of this stuff, and we need to keep pursuing it. So good job, Frank.
Well, not only is it an open book for this radio program, but it's an open book for Congress. Congress has made no bones about the fact that they're not done with this by a long shot looking into this. So it's going to be interesting. All right, 646-720-0635. Steve, what's going on with the Boeing Starliner? Are these astronauts still up there, pseudo-stranded?
Well, let me say this. Legacy media sometimes gets it wrong, and I say it this way, not that we're always accurate, but we try to give nothing but the truth here, and that's what you will always hear from me. And if I don't know it, I'll be honest to say the same. But here we go. On to the subject. We're hearing in some legacy media, the astronauts are stranded on the Boeing Starliner at the ISS. Well, no, that is not true at all. Now, what they're trying to do is resolve, I don't know all the fine details, I don't think any news media outlet does. There's issues with the thrusters on the Boeing Starliner, helium leaks, and what are these thrusters? These are these little tiny directional, you move them and change the direction so you can actually maneuver this particular spacecraft called the Starliner. And as evidence and proof of this, when they tried to dock on June the 5th, they had some issues just getting close to the International Space Station. That's a precision dance that I probably wouldn't want to be responsible for, because you have to make sure that you lock right into that locking module. So the issue is, what are they doing up there? They're not stranded. If they had to come out and egress, as they call it, they could do it. But the reason that they're waiting on this, there's no rush to do it. And they could stay up there for 40, 50 days, I believe, plenty of supplies on ISS. But the most magnificent part of this, and sorry to be redundant, I think we talked about it before, just to remind listeners who may have not heard this will be the first U.S. space crew to attempt to land on solid land, not in water, as all these other landings have happened. Your heat shield needs to be good so you don't burn up. Let's pray that works, and I'm sure it will. The deployment of parachutes, and then a simulated or some type of airbag that deploys. And the landing site at this point is in New Mexico at the White Sands region, which is easily visible. If you look at an Earth satellite image, you can easily see from space that whole white area, so it looks like a pretty simple target. And we'll hope that they can come back. I don't think there's any stranded issue involved here.
At 646-720-0635, we're going to continue our cosmic conversations with Dr. Sky straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come? Won't you come? Stood a ring.
9 minutes till the top of the hour. Well, that sun has been working overtime. It is hot and getting hotter, or so it seems. Here to break down for us the wide variety of objects, of heavenly bodies and celestial objects, is Steve Cates, a.k.a. Dr. Sky. He is a veteran radio and TV broadcaster. You could check out his podcast at redapplepodcastnetwork.com. It's called the Dr. Sky Experience. You can also just search it on any podcast app and get it that way. Steve, speaking of the sky, what is coming up on in the sky that we need to be aware of, that we should keep a lookout for?
Well, Frank, this Saturday, an interesting event for all of the listening area. As you look on Saturday evening, as the sun sets, or even before, in the southern sky is the first quarter moon. And for those lucky enough maybe to have a pair of binoculars or even a telescope, just to the left edge, that's the darker edge of the moon, not the bright side, you'll see a star sitting there near the limb of the moon. And as time progresses, we will see that star called Spica, a star that's about 250 light years away. And by the way, the light of Spica, which is a much larger star than the sun, think of it this way. We just celebrated our 248th anniversary of American independence. The light of Spica left right around the time that they inked the Declaration. And what you'll see if you follow this is all across the nation in North America. You can go to different websites to get exact times, but you'll be able to witness this. I've seen many. It's not that unusual, but when you see Spica hanging off the edge of the dark limb of the moon, you'll see it blink out. And then as time moves on, if you follow the whole progression, you'll see it magically pop out the other side. So that's something rare. It's called an occultation, or we call it a star eclipse by the moon. And then we move on, as I mentioned before, to the beautiful full moon on the 21st. This is a great opportunity, Frank, to take a look at the sky before the full moon because things are in the sky. And we have a little comet. People can look it up. It's called Comet 13P, the 13th periodic comet ever discovered by Olbers, who was one of the philosophers, astronomer, who talked about Olbers' paradox, the simple question. I was listening one night, and a caller called in on Just Ask Frank Anything. Why is the sky dark at night? So Olbers.
Yeah, how did I do with that answer, by the way?
I thought you did very well, but the complicated answer, the answer to this, what am I talking about? Olbers' paradox says, well, if there's so many billions of stars in the night sky or in the sky, why are they all not stuck together? And why is the sky dark? Well, the simple answer is sky in the universe is so large that maybe the light, not maybe, definitely the light of those stars hasn't even reached us yet in the total number. But the interesting thing about the comet, shifting back to that, it's binocular visible in dark skies just below, way below the bowl of the Big Dipper. And you can go to a website, which I always promote. It's just theskylive.com, like THE skylive.com. The listeners will love this one because it's got so much information. You could literally get in trouble by not doing your job or household chores or whatever, but don't do it when you're driving.
Yeah, that's sound advice. 646-720-0635. Mike is in Queens. Hi, Mike.
Gentlemen, good evening. Dr. Sky, greetings from Jackson Heights. So,
hey, that's where I used to live. I lived in Jackson Heights for years, right along Northern Boulevard.
God's country. Yeah, it's a great place to visit. Yeah. Listen, what are your thoughts?
I used to eat at a place called Chicken Delight over there off of Northern Boulevard. Yeah, I remember.
Oh, yeah. They probably have the same chicken that you had back 30 years ago, yeah?
Right. Don't cook tonight. Call Chicken Delight.
I'm kidding. Chicken Delight is wonderful. It cures what ails you, yes. Listen, real quick. I'll just throw it out there. Who owns the moon and who owns Mars? Because it's getting to the point where I'm thinking one day somebody's going to plant the flag in there and say, we own the moon. Goodbye, America. And I don't know if they're going to set up a toll booth, but it seems like everybody's very possessive these days, like with wars and stuff like that. Has there been any treaties or anything signed to protect the world against somebody just seizing the moon or seizing Mars? And I'll take
very good. Very good question, Mike. Thanks for calling. I assure you there's no Chicken Delight up there, but here we go. Nobody at this point can claim, and probably at any point, ownership. The United States went there, as we know, we celebrate on the 20th of July, this epic landing on the moon. So America came in peace for all mankind, but we didn't take a claim of saying we own it. Now, the Chinese, and this is interesting, they also have somewhat, like in one of the papers that they've written on this, they also kind of disagree with that they believe in many ways that they should have territorial rights to the moon. Obviously, the same thing, Mike, with Mars and any of these other planets, at least from the American side of the equation. Nobody owns the moon. So here's another field that if youngsters and any age people want to get involved in, space law might be an interesting area because I know here in Arizona, I don't know about the New York area, we have so many injury lawyers. The television is filled every 5 seconds with one, not knocking them. But what we probably need on a more serious note, Mike and Frank, is some way to really adjudicate what happens when we look at this, just like Antarctica. Nobody technically owns Antarctica. No one nation. People have tried. So let's hope that comes out to be a peaceful resolution because so many people and countries are going there and the beat goes on.
Steve, before we run out of time here, apparently there was a big syzygy in June, and I have to be honest, I am not even sure if I am pronouncing the word syzygy correctly. At the very least, even if you can't tell me how to pronounce it, I am sure you can tell us what it is.
Well, it's very simple. The explanation or the actual spelling is SYZYGY. It sounds like something made up in, some sci-fi movie or so. But what it simply means is the alignment of three celestial bodies. So let's take the great eclipse that we had back on April the 8th. that indeed was a syzygy, the alignment of the sun, the moon, and the earth in a long line, which is like 180 degrees. So that could account for anything in space that has an alignment of three objects, or maybe more objects than three, but the pronunciation is syzygy. And many years ago, that was asked of me on some programs, and it was so incredible because, always honest with the audience, I had to scratch my head and say, boy, that almost sounds like a made-up word, but it really is true. The alignment of three, possibly more bodies in space.
That's pretty cool. I'm not going to squeeze in another call here, even though there are a lot of folks eager to chat with you. Steve, if people do have questions for you that they want to email you, and maybe we'll get to them in a future segment, can you quickly give the best email for people to reach you at?
Well, sure. Always a pleasure. It's just Dr. Sky, just DRSKY show @gmail.com. And hopefully we'll progress to having an email with the WABC, of course, ID on it, which would obviously help. But for now, that would be something I think very interesting, that people can send me questions, and I do respond to all of them. And it's grateful. I'm grateful to you, Frank, and the station, and John Katz and the TDs for having this experience here with my own Dr. Sky experience, as we talk about events and topics from astronomy, space, aviation, and stories of American exceptionalism.
Thank you, Steve. For everybody else, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars.
This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
Frequently, I've been accused of exaggerating when introducing a guest, using certain qualifiers to make them sound as if they just split the atom while inventing sliced bread. I have to tell you, I wish I had not been accused of those things before, because I have to say of Maureen Callahan, she is probably my favorite writer. I don't think she's my favorite living writer. I don't think she's my favorite writer of a certain genre. I think she just might be my favorite writer. You might have read her in the Daily Mail or the New York Post or any of her books. She's one of the only people that can make anything from serial killers to the Academy Awards sound equally interesting. She manages to take subjects that I have no interest in and keep me as riveted as if I'm reading the greatest fictional novel of all time. She manages to take subjects that I am interested in and thought I knew something about, and then I read her columns, her work, and I realize, oh boy, how did I not come to that very same conclusion? I must be a buffoon. Now I'm just going to parrot whatever Maureen Callahan says and sound like I know what I'm talking about. Maureen Callahan is an award-winning investigative journalist, author, columnist, and commentator, and her new book has a lot of people talking. It's called Ask Not, The Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. It is my great pleasure to welcome back to the program after far too long of an absence, the one and only Maureen Callahan. Maureen, it's great to talk to you again.
Frank, it's great to talk to you, and what an introduction. I can't possibly live up to it. I will do my best for you and your listeners to try, but wow. That was a doozy. Thank you.
Well, it is totally sincere, and I think you know that. I've praised you privately. That I just love your work. I'm such a big fan. By the way, if people have not read your book about Israel Keyes, the serial killer, that is definitely something people should check out. I just recommended it to a friend 2 weeks ago, even before I knew that we were going to chat. A lot of folks. Yeah, no, I mean, it's just as relevant today as ever. But a lot of folks, Maureen, used to read you on a regular basis in the New York Post. You're not writing for the New York Post anymore. I know you're busy as ever doing a lot of other things. How is New York Post life for you? What have you been up to since leaving the New York Post, aside, of course, from this new book?
Yeah, I left the Post. I went over to the Daily Mail, where I've been columning about a couple of times a week on a range of topics. We're in an incredible news cycle right now, and I've been working on this new book, which just came out last week, and it's had a really incredible reception. I could not have foreseen at all the reaction to this book. We sold out on Amazon before we were even officially on sale. The pre-orders were through the roof. So it's been wild. It's been really, really interesting and fun.
Well, I the only thing that surprises me about what you just said is that you didn't anticipate this sort of a reaction. I absolutely could have anticipated this kind of a reaction. I want to ask you about the book in a second, but I read your column in the Daily Mail about President Biden's post-debate interview with George Stephanopoulos, and you said that he gave everyone the middle finger with his George Stephanopoulos interview. Explain that. How did he give everybody the middle finger? And do you have a prediction ultimately on whether he stays in this race or bows out?
So I said I thought that Joe Biden gave America the middle finger because he has been, since 2020, the premise of his campaign is ostensibly we are in a, quote, battle for the soul of America. He is fighting for all of us against a demagogue, an authoritarian, a would-be dictator. Our very democracy is at stake. If he truly believes these things, 76% of Americans, current polling, think that he is too old and infirm to hold office. He is losing to Donald Trump. If he truly believes these things, the patriotic, decent thing to do is to step aside. And instead he says it's really up to the Lord God Almighty to come down and tell me to step aside. Not the party elders, not Barack Obama, not the American people for whom he works, by the way. We hire him, not the other way around. He then is asked by Stephanopoulos, if what you say is the worst comes to pass, which is Donald Trump gets elected, how will you feel not having stepped down? And he said, as long as I did my goodest job that I could do. So in the end, it's all about Joe Biden. Anyone who's worried about the Supreme Court, women's reproductive rights, the border, foreign policy in a world on fire, Joe Biden cares if he did the best job he could do. And
the goodest.
The goodest. And he clocks out at 8 and is only operating, if you believe it, which I don't, from 10 to 4.
Yeah, I'd love to get a job with hours like that, honestly. And what's interesting about what you just mentioned is he reached out to your namesake, Maureen Dowd, at the New York Times, and the White House apparently asked her to remove the word goodest and replace it with another word that he didn't say, which is interesting. But the world is filled with Biden commentary. We'll save that for another day. Let's talk about your new book, Ask Not, The Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. Why the Kennedys, Maureen? People have obviously been writing about the Kennedys as both history and current events for over 60 years. Why did you choose them, and specifically the women in the Kennedy world, as the focus of this book?
Well, I knew I was going to do a book on the Kennedys for a while. I'd been columning on them for a long time. My sort of eureka moment was Ted Kennedy's funeral. I don't know if you remember watching any of that.
I do.
Frank.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So you do. So, it was 3 days of wall-to-wall cable news coverage, Ted Kennedy lying in state, given a statesman's funeral, thousands of Americans from all over traveling to D.C. to pay their respects. Not once did I hear the name Mary Jo Kopechne. Not once. Mm-hmm. Chappaquiddick was barely a mention. For those too young to remember, Ted Kennedy killed a young campaign aide named Mary Jo Kopechne, leaving her to suffocate in a car that was turned over in 3 feet of water. She died an agonizing, slow death. She could have been saved. So, smash cut to after Me Too, Harvey Weinstein's conviction, the landscape begins changing. And I thought, nobody's really told the story of the women who generationally, serially, have been used, abused, disposed of by Kennedy men. And we have a media that not only looked the other way, but consistently has either minimized these tragedies, transformed them into tragedies that have befallen the men, or just some sort of overall Greek curse that somehow elevates them in the public sphere rather than the opposite. So I thought this kind of a book was long overdue. But I also really wanted to write it like it was fiction. I wanted it to be very character-driven, very inside the minds and hearts of these women. I didn't want it to read like a polemic. And so it does read like a novel, but, it's almost, as they say, truth is stranger than fiction. There's so much wild stuff that I learned, and I thought I knew just about everything there was to know. So the book was a great surprise for me as well.
You dedicate this book to the inconvenient women everywhere. Is that the general theme in the women in the Kennedy life that have been mistreated or worse? Is that they've been inconvenient and their relationships with these Kennedy men have been inconvenient?
Well, once you become inconvenient in the Kennedy sphere as a woman, you're done. And, I dedicated it to inconvenient women everywhere because I think every woman knows what it's like to, at one time or another, feel as though they are inconvenient. In the Kennedy sphere, what will tend to happen to you is they will call you crazy. They may try to forcibly institutionalize you or lobotomize you, slut shame you, get rid of you in whatever manner is most expedient, gaslight you to the point of suicide, shred your reputation in the public square. There's an example in the back of the book of a 14-year-old girl who Robert Kennedy's son, Michael. Now, this was the way it was covered in the media at the time in the 1980s, early 90s, quote unquote, had an affair with. She was their 14-year-old babysitter. He was in his mid-30s. And the way this was covered when it came out in the mainstream media was that this young teenage girl, was a seductress, a temptress. And what could Michael Kennedy do but succumb to her wiles?
It's so interesting. I mean, you compare the media coverage of that with a 36-year-old New Jersey teacher that sleeps with an 18-year-old, and they're covering that as she gets hauled off to jail as if she's the worst sexual predator in history. But you focus on 13 women here. And a lot of the women are household names that people know. Some of them are not. You begin the book by saying that the book is not ideological or partisan. A lot of the skeptical people in our audience, and maybe a lot of the people that hang on to the Camelot myth or were inspired by Robert F. Kennedy's campaign in 1968, they may say, okay, everybody says that they're nonpartisan or non-ideological, but is this book really nonpartisan and non-ideological? Are you grinding some sort of a partisan axe because you hate the Kennedys and everything they've done for America?
No, not at all. And in fact, in the back of the book, I sort of talk about my own origin story with the Kennedys. You know, I'm Irish Catholic. I'm from the East Coast. I grew up with a father who worshipped the Kennedys, and JFK especially. My fascination was rooted in his fascination. And then my mother really saw that the Kennedys as the ultimate hypocrites, and she had really no use for them. And so this book is sort of an inevitable reckoning with both points of view. I consider the book really humanist more than anything, and if I assail anyone other than the Kennedy men, it's the media for turning a blind eye to such craven misbehavior, whether it goes to JFK taking the virginity of a 19-year-old White House intern and then shuttling her around the country as a sex slave. And the media knew all of this at the time. The media also knew how sick JFK was physically. I mean, he was a broken man physically. He gave the appearance of youthful vigor and athleticism. He was tanned. He was always photographed on sailing on boats and, you know, relaxing and all of this, but he was so sick. You know, he had such a bad back. He had congenital diseases, that he actually hid from Jackie before they married. He was afraid he would never marry her. She would never marry him, rather, had she known. And wow. I say that, Frank, because I think you can draw a complete through line from that, I would call malpractice on the part of the media to what we're seeing unfold today with Joe Biden, where the media is acting completely like there's gambling in this establishment. Like what? Like the president isn't compos mentis? Like we've all known this, but since the debate, we've now had to fully acknowledge it. But really, we all know that the bulk of the mainstream media has been covering up for Joe Biden. And it's this kind of toxicity that still exists in our politics and our culture that I really hope a book like this begins to flush out.
Yeah, no, well said. We were talking with Maureen Callahan. Her new book is Ask Not, the Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. You indicated the things that you learned in working on this book and referenced the things that you learned researching it. Your book obviously delves pretty deeply into the dark underbelly of the Kennedy family. I know there's a lot here, and we're not going to get into all 13 women, but what was the most surprising or unexpected discovery that you made during your research for this book?
There were two come to top of mind. One is in researching Rosemary Kennedy, who was the beautiful young daughter of Joe and Rose Kennedy, who had some learning disabilities, had some mood disorders. Joe Kennedy, the patriarch, had her forcibly lobotomized when she was in her early 20s, and then stashed her away in a Wisconsin convent and never told the rest of her siblings where she was or what happened to her. The why of that has always been explained as, well, Joe was busy raising future presidents. It was a different time. They couldn't have a daughter who was seen as mentally impaired. That would be a stain on the entire family and prevent Jack from ever becoming president. Not so. It turns out that people who are close to the family friends, suspected, most likely correctly, that Joe had been sexually abusing Rosemary.
Wow.
And that he needed to keep her quiet. And that's why he had her lobotomized. I mean, he was a monster nonpareil. The second is, we're coming up in America on the 25th anniversary of the plane crash that took the lives of JFK Jr., his wife Carlin Bessette, and her sister Lauren Bessette. JFK Jr., of course, was piloting that plane. Every anniversary, America rends its garments. What a tragedy. What could have been. It's not so. JFK Jr. not only had no business flying that night, he almost crashed into an American Airlines commercial plane that was packed full of nearly 300 passengers making its descent to JFK International Airport, ironically. Everything he did that night and the state that his mind was in, I outline it in the book. I won't go into detail for your listeners so we can move on, but it really points more to a murder-suicide than anything else.
Wow. So when if people ask what's new in this book, is it just an encapsulation and a chronicling of stuff that we already knew about Kennedy philandering? The answer is there's a substantial amount of new information in this, including what you mentioned with Joe Kennedy and that John F. Kennedy Jr. instance there, which is terrific. And I am not the least bit surprised. And I'm looking forward to finishing reading this. I just started this last week. Speaking of Joe Kennedy,
you're the best. Not everyone reads the book, by the way.
And I don't blame them because 3-4 hours on the air every day, you can't read every book. But there are certain books that I make a priority to read. Speaking of Joe Kennedy, though, obviously he's the patriarch, the guy that set a lot of the modern Kennedy dynasty in formation. What else can you tell us about Joe Kennedy and his relationship with women other than his daughter? What did he do, if anything, in terms of philandering, and what kind of a role model was he for his sons in terms of dealing with women?
Well, he would bring his mistresses home for family dinner. He had a lengthy affair with a very famous Hollywood actress named Gloria Swanson. I believe he helped get her out of her movie contract and helped her set up her own production company. But he was generally a monster to women in his life. Jack Kennedy, as a young man, was fond of saying the ambassador has a tendency to wander at night. This was a coded warning to friends of his sisters who, after everyone had gone to bed, Joe would sneak into their guest bedrooms and rape them. That was just what he did.
Wow. Jeez.
Yeah. So you can take all of that, and then you can, I sort of twin that to his, I believe what his political original sin was, which was as United States ambassador to England in the run-up to the war, was not only in favor of appeasing Hitler, but found much about Hitler he admired, including Hitler's programs to exterminate the mentally impaired. Now, when the war was about to begin in England, when Germany was on the verge of attacking England, Joe rushed all of his children out of the country back to America, except for Rosemary, who he knew would perish under a Nazi regime.
My goodness. Now, in terms of the kind of role model that he was for his sons, clearly his sons knew about his behavior. And I'm wondering if this was an instance of them intentionally emulating it, or if what drove the Kennedy men to such extreme behaviors and attitudes towards women was something else. Was it power? Was it upbringing? Was it societal pressures? Or was it something else? What motivated so many of these Kennedy men to behave in the manner that they did?
It's so interesting. I mean, they definitely learned at the feet of their father, who treated women as utterly disposable, as things to be used, abused, raped, what have you, who treated their mother so terribly that she was never there. So these children were really raised without a mother, which also, of course, impacted the way they thought about women. You know, they actually really hated women. Jack Kennedy, for all of his prolific womanizing, did not like sex and wasn't good at it. Every single woman who had sex with Jack Kennedy, including his wife Jackie, had the same complaint. He goes too fast, there's no foreplay, and then he falls asleep. It lasts for 3 minutes. One girlfriend compared it to like a dog relieving itself on a fire hydrant. Like it was an itch he had to scratch, but it wasn't anything he particularly liked or enjoyed. And I think it's a key part of his psyche. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is an inopportune time to ask, but how long is it supposed to go? It's supposed to go more than 3 minutes?
Maybe talk to your wife. I don't know. I think that up within.
No, I'm hoping she doesn't know. She skipped that chapter in the book. All right. Obviously, I have two brothers, and we are very different. We have different attitudes, different likes, different dislikes, different experiences, different ways that we handle things. And I'm wondering if you're at all guilty of, and I realize you're telling the story of these 13 women, and there are a lot of commonalities in their intersections with Kennedy men, but I'm wondering if you're at all guilty of overgeneralizing everybody with the last name Kennedy. Are there any Kennedy men? I mean, I would think in a family that's as prolific as they are, 8, 9, 10 siblings in some cases, that there's a wide variety of attitudes with how they treat women. Are all the Kennedy men bad when it comes to women?
It is a problem. It is a problem. There's something in the DNA. There's something in the water. Now, I will say, so Joe Jr. died during World War II. That left the Kennedy men down to 3. So it was Jack, Bobby, and Ted. And I do differentiate among their specific characteristics and character traits within the book. I do not paint Jack as all bad. I mean, someone like Jackie Kennedy, a woman of, real intellect and depth herself, fell in love with him. So in order to do right by these women and anyone who reads the book, I had to find the Jack Kennedy that she fell in love with, right? Like, he had to have some redeeming qualities, and indeed he did. But it does trickle down to, let's look at our current third-party candidate for president, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In the book, I talk about the way in which he drove his second wife, Mary Kennedy, to such emotional, spiritual, psychological distress that she killed herself. And after she killed herself, he went about maligning her character further and punishing her further in death. And if you wonder how that could be, it's all laid out in her chapter. Friends of hers spoke to me. In fact, her own therapist, who at times treated Mary and Bobby together, was so incensed by what Bobby had put Mary through that she talked to me quite freely. So I think, yes, red alert when you see a Kennedy man coming your way. Women, don't marry one. It never ends well.
Maureen, let me get you to pause right there. We're going to continue in a moment with Maureen Callahan, award-winning investigative journalist, author, columnist, and commentator. Her book is Ask Not, the Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. When we come back, you're going to hear about an aspect of the Kennedy legacy that is very rarely talked about and something that you, even if you follow the Kennedys, may not know anything about. We'll continue straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano, talking with Maureen Callahan. Her book is Ask Not, the Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. Maureen, let me ask you this. An aspect of the Kennedy romantic life that has gotten so much attention since the 60s, really, you deal with at length in the chapter titled The Bombshell, Part 3, and that has to do with Marilyn Monroe. There's been all these rumors, maybe more than rumors, that both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy had an affair with Marilyn Monroe, universally regarded as just an incredible icon of beauty and sexuality in America at that time. What does your research suggest about what the truth is regarding John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy and their relationships with Marilyn Monroe?
Oh my God, Frank, it's more sordid and sad than one would ever know from looking at it from the outside, and the veneer of just sheer glamour and beauty and wealth and fame and power. You know, Marilyn Monroe was the world's biggest sex symbol at this time. And she was reduced to feeling like nothing by Jack Kennedy, then the sitting president of the United States, his brother Bobby, who was serving as his attorney general. Both brothers were sexually involved with her at the same time. And in fact, the night that Marilyn infamously sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" to Jack at Madison Square Garden in front of a televised audience, 15 minutes prior, she had been backstage with Bobby in the green room, and they had had sex. And this was a dynamic that for Marilyn, who had grown up an abandoned child, cycled through foster homes where she was molested and abused, and then went into the Hollywood system, she felt an incredible validation that these two extremely powerful, extremely intelligent men were vying for her. That was what her psyche was processing all of this as. For the Kennedys, she was a plaything. She was a notch on their belts. She was a person they would put on the phone so they could show their father they were in bed with the great Marilyn Monroe. And when Jack cut off his relationship with her, and he just ghosted her immediately once Jackie saw that Madison Square Garden performance, and she said, I am going to divorce you, and I'm going to take the children, and I'm going to cost you a second term, and the entire world will know why, unless you end this now. And he did. He ended it. And he fobbed Marilyn off on Bobby, who was also trying to make his retreat. And Marilyn had become very inconvenient. And in the book, I'd outline what we have learned, even fairly recently, about the hours leading up to her death. And in her house, caught on tape, demanding to know where the F is it, seemingly in reference to her diary, was Bobby Kennedy.
Wow, my goodness. So I know you said that Jack tried to pawn Marilyn off on Bobby when he was trying to make a clean break. But there was a time before that where they were both sleeping with her, and both brothers knew of the relationship that the other one was having with her, right?
Yes. And, to sort of circle back to what you were saying about Joe and what the Kennedy boys, men, learned about women and how they regarded women from him, this was something that they really had no sexual boundaries. The Kennedy men were very sexually incestuous. Joe, for example, had bedded a very famous movie star, Marlene Dietrich. And so Jack went after her as well, and that was it was a competition of sorts among each other. After Jack was assassinated, I go into this in the book quite a bit, Bobby and Jackie began an affair. I think today we would consider that and recognize that as a trauma bond more than anything. They were the two people closest to Jack and the two people most destroyed by his death. But, it seems as though that kind of stuff that would strike most of us as kind of creepy, kind of weird, kind of not emotionally, sexually healthy was a way of life for the Kennedy men.
Wow. If people are just tuning in, we're talking with Maureen Callahan. She's the author of Ask Not, The Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. Maureen, you've been very generous with your time. Stick with me 2 more minutes if you can, though.
Sure.
How do the Kennedy men reconcile being Catholic and clearly this pride they have in being Catholic and doing all the things that Catholics are expected to do, like have large families and so forth, go to church regularly? How do they reconcile that with the adultery, the philandering, the blatant mistreatment of women?
Are you Catholic, Frank?
I was raised Catholic. I identify more as being Episcopalian these days.
Okay, so I was raised Catholic, and I have found that there is no greater hypocrisy than the Catholic Church, which has spent, its entire existence hiding the worst of child abusers, what have you. And I think that for the Kennedys, religion is a thing that they hide behind. It is something that offers constant forgiveness, no matter the heinousness of your acts or the true depth or authenticity of your contrition. I think the thing that began as Jack Kennedy's was considered his greatest hurdle to overcome, which was convincing America that as a Catholic, he could be an agnostic president, that his religion would not affect the way he governed. In the end, for the Kennedys, it actually turned out to be one of their greatest benefits, really. And, the Catholic Church also, I think, does drama almost better than anyone going, right? So, when Jack is assassinated, Jackie immediately draws upon her greatest gift, really, which was, as an actress who understood theater, and the Catholic Church, really is a huge part of that. But as to whether I don't think it matters to them. I don't think it ever really has. Women who have married into the Kennedy family, historically, this is what they're told. You may have married in, but you're not a blood Kennedy. You're not a real Kennedy. So never forget your place. You're a second-class citizen. Even if you have a Kennedy child or a bunch of them, you're never really a Kennedy. And when they're tired of you, or you've served your purpose, or a new shiny woman comes along, then you're to go quietly.
I guess the one question that a lot of people are going to ask is, even though the Kennedys always had money, even though they have often had power, even though they have almost always been famous, how do they get away with this? I mean, there has been some instances of Kennedy men getting convicted of certain crimes, but it seems like criminality is pervasive in a lot of the activities of various Kennedy men. And it might seem hard to believe for a lot of folks that they could almost always get away with this. What does your research suggest of how they're able to continually get away with this pattern of criminality?
Honestly, it can go from anything to they stand before a judge who happens to be a Kennedy family friend, to leveraging a media that has long been sympathetic to the Kennedys. They leverage their history of family tragedy. In the book, I write about a young woman named Pamela Kelly, who in the late 70s was paralyzed in a Jeep accident, wholly preventable, a Jeep driven by Joe Kennedy III, one of Bobby's kids, flipped over, paralyzed this poor girl for life. He went in front of a judge who was a friend of the Kennedys. The judge said, I don't think jail's going to do anything. You're going to have $100 fine. You have a great name. Go do something with it. Or you have a woman like Patricia Bowman, who credibly accused William Kennedy Smith of rape in Palm Beach in the 90s, who, with the help of the New York Times, was shredded. She was denigrated as, before she ever went to trial, a single mother, out late, wearing a skirt. She was having drinks. She was a little wild. Was she divorced? Did she ever have an abortion? What does her father do? Is he a donor to Republicans? All of a sudden, in the mainstream media, in the paper of record, you have a woman, before she sees her day in court, shredded in the national media. And this is always with the help of the Kennedys. Always.
My goodness. And just because Joe Kennedy III is currently serving as the special envoy for Northern Ireland, just as point of a clarification, that Pamela Kelly story, I think, was about the fellow that they call Joe Kennedy Jr., who was one of Bobby's kids, not Joe Kennedy III, who's his son, right?
No, it was Joe Kennedy III.
I see. Okay. So I thought they called Joe Kennedy. Okay. So the one that's
we may be crossing wires, but he has been active politically for many years.
The former congressman years ago, right? Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem. That's my issue. Is I don't like that they don't stick with the traditional naming of who's the second and who's junior and who's the third and so forth. I think they should go consecutive with it. Hey, let me end with this, because as the audience knows, I have been very fond of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I started as a skeptic with a lot of the anti-vaccine stuff, but he really has won me over with a lot of the different things that he's been saying about the political process. He's been kind enough to come on this show many times, and we always have a pretty good conversation. And I always get dogged by a lot of listeners, sounds like rightly so, based on some of your writing, about what became of his wife, Mary, and how she killed herself. Just on behalf of the folks that feel like it might be unfair to blame Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for what happened with Mary Richardson Kennedy. A lot of people go through bad divorces, and a lot of people deal with things like depression, and a lot of people, unfortunately, end up killing themselves. Is it unfair to blame Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for what happened with his wife? Putting aside what you just said about how he has kind of demonized his ex-wife after she has killed herself, can we point the finger to him specifically about what happened with Mary Richardson Kennedy?
Many people who knew Mary say yes. I don't know if you happen to see this tweet by Billy Baldwin, Alec Baldwin's brother, who was a close friend of Mary's. He and his wife were close friends of Mary's, and he tweeted about a year ago that someday the truth will come out. You know, there were many nights that Mary cried on my shoulder if these walls could talk about what a terrible man this was and is. Bobby told Mary she would be better off dead when she was at her lowest and he had left her. She was the mother of their 4 children. He was trying to starve her out. He had cut off her $20,000 a month court-approved monthly stipend to raise the children and run the home. So you had Mary now at the school run, American royalty, begging other mothers for $20 so she could load up on her groceries or fill up her gas tank. Okay, this was someone who was out to humiliate her in the most public way possible. When she died, he fought her siblings who only wanted her body to bury in their own family plot. He fought them tooth and nail. He won. He buried her with great fanfare, great publicity in the Kennedy family plot. 1 week later, without the proper permits, without alerting anyone, he had her coffin dug up in the middle of the night and moved 700 feet away to be buried alone on the side of a hill facing traffic. I have a problem with someone who treats women, let alone the mother of his children, this way, and deems themselves fit for the highest office in the land.
I have no defense for that, Maureen. Well, it's a fascinating book. I hope people check it out. The book is called Ask Not, the Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. It's been my pleasure this last hour to chat with its author, Maureen Callahan. Maureen, I hope we can chat again soon. It's always a treat talking to you.
I would love to, Frank. Thank you for having me. It felt like 5 minutes. It was such a fun conversation.
Indeed. If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, you could give me a call, 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. I'm Frank Morano. Straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Oh, when the sun beats down and burns the tar up on the roof, and your shoes get so hot, you wish your tired feet were fireproof. Under the boardwalk, down by the sea, on a blanket with my baby's where I'll be. Under the boardwalk, out of the sun. Under the boardwalk, we'll be having some fun. Under the boardwalk, people walking above. Under the boardwalk, we'll be making love. Under the boardwalk, boardwalk. From the park you hear the happy sounds of a carousel.
Love this song. Something so summery about this, especially if you're planning a vacation to somewhere with a boardwalk. And I'm hoping to get to the. Now I'm going to Cape May at the end of this month. They don't have a boardwalk in Cape May, but the neighboring communities certainly do. All right, 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. A lot of people eager to react to my interview with Maureen Callahan. I will give you the opportunity to do just that. Let me begin with Pamela. Hi, Pamela.
Hello. That's one book I'm buying. I know somebody who delivered to Massachusetts to the businesses up there. And I can say this, I'm part Irish, and I'm going to say it. And they're very protective of their Kennedys up there. And he made a mild comment about the Kennedys. Oh, my God. The boss came down, started screaming and yelling at him. You're never going to deliver here again. I'm calling your boss. He tried to get him fired.
You're kidding.
Oh, no, I'm not kidding. There's a protective umbrella up there. They can do no wrong. They're like tribal, a clan up there. They protect them.
Well, it's interesting, Pamela. Thank you. I mentioned South Jersey a minute ago, Cape May, Atlantic City area, and Patrick Kennedy's wife, Amy Kennedy, ran for Congress there 2 years ago. What year is it? 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago, 4 years ago. I've lost track. 2020 was such like a lost year. I think it was 4 years ago. And she lost. She did not win a very tight election. So I think at least outside of Massachusetts, that Kennedy luster, at least politically, has started to wane a little bit. Yeah, it was 2020. She ran for Congress. But there's still certainly a lot. They have a lot of admirers. And let's forget, Joe Kennedy III, who I just looked this up, by the way. His father was the one that she was talking about. That's Joe Kennedy II. Joe Kennedy III is the envoy to Northern Ireland, the former congressman. He just ran for U.S. Senate in Massachusetts, and he lost a Democratic primary. So lost to Ed Markey. So it's still possible, even in Massachusetts, that you need more than just that Kennedy name to get elected. So maybe as things change, as things age, things change. David is in the Bronx. Hi, David.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Two things, please. She lost me when she attacked John F. Kennedy Jr., saying that he was doing murder/suicide. That had to be the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Everyone knows he was reckless and negligent. That's different than murder-suicide. I don't know why she said that. I think it's just to get attention for her book. It's unfortunate that she would commit character assassination against someone who's not alive to defend themselves, like most of the Kennedys that she slammed. Now, to get to Bobby Jr., who's your candidate for president, what really bothers me about him, besides the constant lying and whining and complaining that he does about being a victim, is what he did to his ex-wife. And one of the things that he did, that she did mention, is he's blaming her for his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, I didn't know Jeffrey Epstein. She made me socialize with him. He's actually said that. Why won't he explain why he was on Jeffrey Epstein's plane so many times, or why he spent so much time with him? Same thing with Donald Trump. Nobody can explain why they spent so much time with this man. As far as I know, except for being a pedophile, the man had no qualities that anyone can cite.
And not to make this whole Epstein discussion, David, but very wealthy people in certain elite sectors of society do run in those circles. And, from what I understand with Jeffrey Epstein, and again, it's a much longer list than just Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Prince Andrew and Donald Trump. It's, Bill Clinton and a host of other people. This guy really did hang out with the creme de la creme of society. And what I understand from Alan Dershowitz and others is he used to have these big salons where he'd have like the best person that you could want on any given subject over to his townhouse for a talk, and you'd want to go to hear that person. For instance, I don't know that this is the case, but if they were talking about, tax reform, he might have Steve Forbes and Art Laffer over at his house. So he attracted a lot of those folks. So I feel like that might be a little bit of a guilt by association thing.
All right, I'll grant you that possibly, but I think Bobby needs to really explain in greater detail than blaming his late wife, who I agree with the author that he basically drove her to suicide. I didn't know about moving her coffin. I mean, that's
I didn't either. I never heard that before. It is in the book. And it is, it's pretty well sourced in this book. So I didn't know that either. That was certainly disappointing. David, thank you. 646-720-0635. Big day for me today. Because Rach, first of all, my wife's going to the dentist and she's insisting that if it goes well, she is never going to this dentist again. So she had this cavity filling years ago and it was fine. It was a tooth filling. It's been fine for years. Then last time she was at this dentist, they did something to this tooth filling and it hurt and needed to be replaced. And she's had nothing but problems with the same filling ever since then. And she says every time they go in with this filling, they have to drill more and take more of your tooth. So she has had it up to here with this dentist. Honestly, I don't have much of a special fondness for this dentist. We go to the same one. You know what's keeping me at this dentist office? There's a great dental hygienist. And both the dentist and the dental hygienist are always complimenting me on my teeth. But I'm hopeful that she can make it through that today with minimal pain and find a new dentist. But I felt bad for her because last few days she's had such a difficult time even chewing on the side of her mouth where that filling is. And she really does believe that all of these problems were really created by this dentist in the first place. So we'll see what happens. Keep asking questions.
This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Thanks for listening. Well, it may be somewhat unsurprising, but I think it's certainly worth noting that apparently the Biden administration is genuinely preparing to blame a foreign government for spreading concerns over Biden's age and his cognitive fitness. And any guesses as to which one? Anyone want to take a wild guess? Out of the 170 countries or so that we deal with on a regular basis, which country do you think they are getting ready to blame spreading rumors about Biden's age and cognitive fitness? Congratulations, you win. You guessed it. You've won a giant case of satisfaction. Yes, Russia and the Kremlin. Yes, that's right. The reason that millions of Americans now have doubts about President Biden's cognitive ability has nothing to do with his debate performance, has nothing to do with the repeated instances. I mean, it's almost too many to list of him showing diminished capacity over the last couple of years, has nothing to do with the fact that the New York Times has reported that a Parkinson's expert has visited the White House 8 times, has nothing to do with the Wall Street Journal story about people behind the scenes saying he is really not able to function, at his former level, has nothing to do with Carl Bernstein reporting, I believe for the Washington Post, that there have been 16 or 18 incidents of people in his inner circle reporting that they saw President Biden behave just like he did at the debate. And of course, it has nothing to do with the debate performance, and it has nothing to do with the George Stephanopoulos interview after the debate performance, where he was asked the very simple question, did you watch the debate? And his response was, I don't think so.
I don't know.
It was 90 minutes. How do you not know if you watched it or not? But the real reason so many of us now have some doubts about President Biden's cognitive ability and mental acuity is because of the Russians. Wall Street Journal yesterday, this is the headline: Russia seeks to boost Trump in 2024. ... U.S. intelligence officials say. So if you read this Wall Street Journal article yesterday, basically they just reprinted a press release. There's no reporting. There's, well, not literally a press release, but they just reprinted whatever the intelligence community, these anonymous intelligence officials, told them. It also said, by the way, that other foreign influence operations in the U.S. include attempts by Iran to covertly encourage protests against the war in Gaza, officials say. And then if you read the article, it says that within the Wall Street Journal article, and it's written by, I don't have a byline, but the article itself says the Russian government has launched a, quote, whole of government, close quote, effort to influence the outcome of the U.S. presidential election and favors Republican candidate Donald Trump in the race, senior U.S. intelligence officials said Tuesday. What I love about that portion of the article is it's a whole of government in effort to influence the election. It's not just a partial role, a partial government incident. And of course, once again, it's U.S. intelligence officials saying, now, I mean, I think it is at least worth mentioning that the U.S. intelligence officials that are saying this all work for the current administration, and that anybody in a leadership role in any of these intelligence agencies got their job because they were appointed by President Biden. So presumably they have at least a little bit of loyalty to President Biden. So they're claiming that these Russian bots and these Russian hackers and these Russian influence peddlers are going on social media and altering images of President Biden and sharing these exaggerated images of President Biden not looking sharp. Really? We're going to blame the Russians for this? The Russia-phobia in this country has reached a level that I don't think we've seen since the height of the Cold War. This Russia hysteria. Oh, it may rain this weekend. Let's blame Russia. I mean, this is just crazy. This is crazy. The reason people have doubts about President Biden's cognitive ability is unfortunately because people who have seen that look, that blank stare during the debate, and have seen it in people that they know, friends, loved ones, they recognize what that is. It has nothing to do with the Russians. And yet, at this press conference yesterday, at the press briefing by the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, she was asked this by a reporter. And this is listen to the question and then listen to what she said.
Have you seen any evidence that the Russians or other foreign powers have tried to seize on the debate performance to repeat some of the president's most embarrassing moments?
So that's a very good question.
That's a very good question. By the way, it was a much longer question than that. We truncated a bit, but that's not a very good question. There's no evidence for this at all. And yet he's basically creating out of whole cloth the fact that the Russians or some foreign adversary are basically using the debate performance to undermine President Biden's performance. No, the debate performance undermined President Biden's image. And by the way, Karine Jean-Pierre, and look, she's got a tough job. I'm not picking on her. Karine Jean-Pierre, she's nodding as this guy, he was a reporter for the New York Times, David Sanger, as David Sanger is asking the question, she's nodding up and down like a bobblehead doll. She couldn't nod more. But then she called it a very good question. Now, if you're one of the other reporters that are in there and you have real questions, because honestly, right now, it looks like, and I don't want to point any fingers, but it looks like there's at least a possibility that there was this mass conspiracy within the Biden campaign and the White House to keep the truth from the public. Clearly, they knew something was up. When President Biden declined the Super Bowl interview, I was prepared to think that a lot of the folks that were raising issues about Biden's cognitive ability were doing it for political reasons, which I don't go for. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think that's healthy. Then President Biden declines the Super Bowl interview. Really? You're going to turn down essentially a softball interview before the largest TV audience of the whole year when you're in a very tight re-election. That was kind of strike one for me, that there's something up. No, there's no reason he wouldn't do the Super Bowl interview. Then when he's interviewed by the special counsel, who his own attorney general appointed, not like it was appointed by, a political adversary. His guy, Merrick Garland, appointed the special counsel, Robert Hur. Robert Hur comes out with this report that says there's no way any jury could find that he had criminal intent because he would come across as a guy with difficulty remembering things, and then cites the specific examples, not being able to remember the years he was vice president, not being able to remember the year his son died, and so forth. And then strike three, I'm skipping over a lot here, but strike three has got to be that debate. And so in the midst of all this, we were told repeatedly, publicly, by a lot of people close to the Biden administration or in the Biden administration that, yeah, he's got plenty of energy. He works circles around all of the younger people in his administration. Well, obviously now we know that's not true. It's just total nonsense. And yet they lied to the public about this. And they planted stories in friendly media outlets, essentially reinforcing this same narrative, which, again, we now know isn't true. Additionally, it was hammered home repeatedly that if you dare question Biden's mental acuity or his cognitive ability, if you even ask the question, you're being somehow immoral or not playing fair. And I think, and this goes to what Maureen Callahan was saying about the conspiracy to hide President Kennedy's diseases from the public or his health from the public. I really do think these folks have a lot to answer for in terms of not being honest. So that's a very good question. So there's a room full of press, liberal outlets, conservative outlets that want to ask real questions. This guy, David Sanger from the New York Times, basically just makes up a theory that, it was the Russians. The Russians are going to make Biden look bad. And she says that's a very good question.
Have you seen any evidence that the Russians or other foreign powers have tried to seize on the debate performance that repeat some of the president's most embarrassing moments?
So that's a very... This is not a question, by the way. It's off-the-wall speculation disguised as a question. If David Sanger was calling Ask Frank Anything with this kind of a question, we would make fun of him.
Very good question. I would have to talk to our team about those particular questions that you just asked. There were multiple questions in your statement there. I would leave it to the Department of Justice as what they announced. Obviously, that's for them to speak to. Look, AI has always been a concern.
AI.
That's why the president made some announcements recently, to take executive action on how we can deal with AI. We want to see more action, more fulsome action legislatively from Congress Congress. That is something. It is a cutting edge technology that we need to get our hands on and get a better understanding of what it could potentially do. And so that is something that the president certainly is looking to make sure that we deal with this in a full whole of government way. On those particular questions, I would have to check in with our team here, and obviously whatever's related to the Department of Justice in that statement. I would refer you.
So between the Wall Street Journal article yesterday and Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday, we now know, if you believe all this, that according to the Journal, the whole of the Russian government is working on electing Donald Trump. And we know that the whole of the American government is making sure that AI doesn't make President Biden look stupid. I mean, when you answer a question like that and give an answer like that, I think the question that I have is, how stupid do you think we are? No, it has nothing to do with the Russians. People can see with their own eyes what's going on. And I don't have any interest in picking on President Biden. Although I do want to say, though, I am shocked that he appears to be staying in this race. I thought that by this time, there was no way he was going to be in this race. But still, I mean, and all indications are he's running full speed ahead. After the debate, I said that was going to be the worst night of Trump's campaign, because there is no way that he's going to be the nominee, meaning Biden. And yet he's staying in. He is doubling down, wrote a letter to members of Congress, is talking with members of the Democratic caucus, Senate and the House, and says he's staying in. I'm just dumbfounded. I was completely wrong, and Anthony Weiner was completely right, at least as of now. I mean, things could change tomorrow. Just amazed. But anyway, so that's that. That's what you're going to hear from the Biden campaign, the Biden administration, and many different aspects of the corporate media. Why does everyone think that President Biden is impaired? You will hear that the reason for that is the Russians. You're going to hear a steady drumbeat of that from now until November. The Russians, the Russians, the Russians. The Russians want to make you think that Biden is dumb or at least, diminished, and they want to elect President Trump. That's what you're going to see now. We got a preview of that yesterday, and it was just so interesting to me that they both the Journal and Karine Jean-Pierre use that term, whole of government. Whole of government. All right. The whole of government, really? Okay. Speaking of President Biden, he was on this as part of his showing that he's not cognitively diminished tour. He was on this radio station, WURD in Philadelphia, and it's a station that caters to a primarily black audience, as I understand it. And this interview has become pretty controversial. President Biden sounded pretty good in this interview, I must say. And this is a little bit of that interview, by the way.
Is there any reason for the American people to be concerned?
No, I had a bad debate.
Yeah.
I had a bad debate. But 90 minutes on stage does not erase what I've done for 3.5 years. Proud of the record. And we just got to keep moving.
So those are the kind of questions that he was getting.
By the way, I'm proud to be, as I said, first vice president, first black woman, served with a black president. I'm proud of the first black woman in the Supreme Court. There's just so much that we can do because together there's nothing. Look, this is the United States of America.
People are picking on him for that response. I actually don't think that's big of a deal. He did misspeak a bit, but you clearly know what he meant. He was proud to be the first vice president to the vice president to the first black president, and to have the first black vice president and appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court. First of all, it's ridiculous pandering. Oh, you like black people, let me vote for you. But, I don't think that was a big deal. But this interview became controversial because the host at WURD, Andrea Lawful Sanders, apparently was given the questions by the Biden campaign as to what to ask. Here she was on CNN.
The questions were sent to me for approval. I approved them.
Okay, so the White House sent the questions to you ahead of the interview?
Yes.
Okay.
I got several questions, 8 of them, and the 4 that were chosen were the ones that I approved.
So after she admitted, Andrea Lawful Sanders, that she got these questions from the Biden team and used them, she was fired. I mean, I have to tell you, and maybe this is always my gut instinct to always stick up for radio people and never want any radio people fired. But that is not a fireable offense. Not at all. Not at all. First of all, I don't know. I'm assuming she's never interviewed a sitting president before. It's an intimidating thing to interview even a presidential candidate or a former president, let alone a sitting president. And it's not something that she has any experience with. So I could see her being happy that they sent her the questions and wanting to use them. And I don't know anything about this woman, but she was asked about this on television and she told the truth. She said they sent her the questions and she said she used them. She said or at least about 8 of them, whatever the case may be. She should absolutely not be fired. I mean, guests send me questions. I wouldn't say all the time, but I would say maybe at least once a month, guests send me questions. And, I would say I rarely use them. But you know what? Sometimes they send a question where I'm thinking, oh, that is something that I wouldn't have thought to ask about. And I will absolutely ask about that. You know what I usually do, actually? Especially if it's somebody that I like or agree with on stuff. I will find people that are smarter than me. And there's some folks listening that I might have done this with. I will find people that are smarter than me and I will say, hey, by the way, I'm interviewing XYZ on blankety blank issue. I know you're totally in disagreement with where he is on this and where I am on this. Give me some suggestions for challenging questions to ask this person. And I do try to ask as many of these challenging questions in a friendly way. But not everybody does things that way. There is no reason this lady should be fired. None. If that's what she was fired for. Is it possible she was fired for something else? Maybe, but I think it's doubtful. The fact that she became a symbol for being basically a Biden campaign co-conspirator, I think is why she was fired. And by the way, she was hosting, I think, a music show, or at least primarily a music show. I mean, you're going to fire her for asking a sitting president the questions that the sitting president said? Come on. That's not right. That's not right. I think she might not have even understood that you don't have to ask those questions. And if the Biden team, she probably wants to have him on again, and she wants this interview to go as well as possible for the Biden team and wants the Biden team to go on her show repeatedly. She's trying to play ball. Look, you can question whether she did the right thing here. I think it was crazy for WURD to fire her. I really do. I really do. Strongly. I'd love to know what you think. 646-720-0635. 646-720-0635. Speaking of Biden questioners, he did a really interesting interview with George Stephanopoulos on Friday night. I thought Stephanopoulos was 5-star. I thought he asked all the right questions, did the right follow-up. I thought he also had the right tone, meaning he was not rude, but he didn't let Biden get away with anything. He let Biden give complete answers. I thought, honestly, I have zero criticisms of this Stephanopoulos interview, but he was asked by TMZ about President Biden, and this is what he said.
Hey, Susan, hey, how you doing? Good. What do you think? Do you think Biden should step down?
You talked to him more than anybody else have lately, and you can be honest. You don't think he can serve 4 more years? All right. That's an answer.
So he basically says that he doesn't think Biden can serve 4 more years. Now, he was probably not prepared for the question. The way TMZ does things, it's almost like paparazzi. These hit and run people, they run up to celebrities in the street with a camera that's rolling, and they try to get these questions asked. Well, yesterday, George Stephanopoulos apologized after being caught on camera quipping that he didn't think President Biden could serve 4 more years. He said in a statement earlier today, I responded to a question from a passerby. I shouldn't have. And George, and then the Puck News and Disney put out a statement. Excuse me. Disney's the parent company of ABC News. And they said George expressed his own point of view and not the position of ABC News. I don't think Stephanopoulos needed to apologize. It's his opinion. And, he did apologize. I don't think it's a big deal either way, but I don't think he needed to apologize. That's it. I side with the broadcaster in both cases. I don't think Miss Lawful Sanders should have been fired, and I don't think George Stephanopoulos should have apologized. It's my view. You're welcome to disagree. 646-720-0635. 646-720-0635. Lastly, on the Biden front, I want to, since we're clearly now in Russia-phobia mode again, and just like 2016, we're going to make sure to blame the Russians for whatever the outcome of the presidential election is that we don't like. It is the 75th anniversary of NATO. And there's this big NATO summit. And as you might expect, not only because he's the president of the United States and the United States is kind of the top dog when it comes to NATO, but also because of the aftermath of the debate, all the attention is on President Biden. So here's a little bit of the remarks that President Biden gave yesterday at the NATO summit.
Americans, they know we're stronger with our friends, and we understand this is a sacred obligation. As President Reagan put it, and I quote, if our fellow democracies are not secure, we cannot be secure. If you are threatened, we are threatened. If you're not at peace, we cannot be at peace. Reagan knew it then, and we know it now. Our nations will continue to keep faith with what we pledged in years to come.
The president did okay, and he does okay when reading from written remarks. But I really do take issue with this whole party that they're having for this 75th anniversary. They're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the alliance and emphasizing the members' long-term commitment. It's a 3-day event, and it's really designed in large part as a show of strength meant for Russia. American officials they're basically using this as an opportunity to tell Russia that they're not going to be relenting anytime soon. But I have to tell you, one of the things that attracted me to President Trump as a presidential candidate in 2016, and he was obviously very different once he was elected, but is he called out the fact that NATO is obsolete. NATO is obsolete. And this is one of the things that I find very attractive about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a presidential candidate. NATO, I don't know what the United States is getting out of its partnership with NATO, if you could even call it a partnership. I mean, I know what companies like Boeing and McDonnell Douglas and Lockheed Martin are getting out of America's partnership with NATO. But by and large, is America safer because we're funding this war in Ukraine? Is America safer because of NATO expansion? It's easy for me to see what countries like Finland get out of being in NATO. It's easy for me to see what countries like Montenegro get out of being in NATO, because basically none of those countries are ever going to be attacked because whoever attacks them has to deal with the United States. But what do we get out of it? Honestly, I know that may sound like an overly simplistic question, but sometimes the overly simplistic ones are the best kind. And what President Biden said there, first of all, it's a totally different world from when Reagan made those comments 40 years ago. Totally different. Second, there's no Warsaw Pact. There's no Berlin Wall. There's I don't think, the same strategic necessity for the United States to play the role it is in NATO now as compared to 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. So we'll see how the rest of the summit goes. But I'd also love to know what they're smoking over there, that they think that Russia is unlikely to gain much, if any, territory in the coming months. This war is not going well for Ukraine. It's not. And the only thing the continued sponsorship by America and the NATO countries is doing is prolonging this war. The United States and or NATO should do the responsible thing here and mediate a peace settlement and bring an end to this fighting. I'm sure a lot of you saw this week, there was a hospital bombed in Ukraine. It's terrible. Absolutely terrible. And unfortunately, this is going to keep going on. We're going to see more death, more destruction, more property damage, more refugees, more people fleeing both Ukraine and Russia because they don't want to be drafted, them continuing to raise the draft age. And, you know, what Biden's remark here.
Americans, they know we're stronger with our friends. And we understand this is a sacred obligation. As President Reagan put it, and I quote, "If our fellow democracies are not secure, we cannot be secure."
So what he says there, and I realize he's quoting Reagan, but when he says, if our fellow democracies are not secure, we cannot be secure, we're not secure. I mean, that does not apply at all to what's going on in the world today. It doesn't. Turkey is a NATO ally. Think about that. Turkey is a NATO ally. If Turkey is attacked, we are treaty bound by Article 5 to come to the aid of Turkey. Would you call Turkey a democracy? I sure wouldn't. I say Turkey looks a lot more like a dictatorship that's almost an Islamist dictatorship. Would you call it a democracy? I wouldn't. And all this, not that Ukraine is a NATO member, but all of this is about continuing to fund and keep up this war in Ukraine, continue to aid Ukraine.
If they're not secure, we cannot be secure. If our fellow democracies are not secure, we cannot be secure.
Listen to me very carefully. Ukraine is not a democracy, period. Ukraine is not a democracy. Ukraine is at best an oligarchy. You know what they don't do in democracies? They don't cancel elections. We had an election in the midst of the Civil War. We had an election in the midst of World War II. We had an election 2 weeks after September 11th. That's what democracies do. Ukraine is not a democracy. You can't just say, oh, well, we're at war. We're not going to have any elections anymore. Zelensky just gets to stay. That's not what democracies do. Democracies don't ban opposition political parties. Democracies don't shut down opposition media outlets. So, I mean, it's great rhetoric. It's a great line, but it's total nonsense. Totally nonsense. 646-720-0635. If you want to comment on any of what I just said, 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight, straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Last night we let the liquor talk. I can't remember everything we we said it all. You told me that you wish I was somebody you never met. But baby, something's telling me this ain't over yet. No way, it was our last night. I kissed your lips, make you grip the sheets with your fingertips. Last bottle of Jack, we split a fifth. Just talking about life, going sip for sip. Yeah, you know you love to fight, and I say shit I don't mean, but I'm still gonna wake up on you and me. I know that last night we let the liquor talk. I can't remember everything we said, but we said it all. You told me that you wish I was somebody you never met.
This is Last Night by Morgan Wallen. This was a birthday bumper music request from a great listener, Jay in New Jersey, who celebrated his birthday yesterday, but he asked if we could throw him a bone in terms of birthday bumper music a day late. So we are. Happy birthday, Jay. Hopefully all of your wishes come true. Thank you for being such a terrific listener of the show. Not quite listener of the week territory, though. And the time has come to name this week's listener of the week. This is someone who doesn't call, but is a very devoted listener, has been a listener for many years, not only to this program over the last 4 years, but to, I think, my radio work for the last decade before that. When Curtis Lewa and I took over the New York State Reform Party, he was a foot soldier in our efforts, and he is a prolific social media user, also a Facebook subscriber. I want to name this week's Listener of the Week as Michael Scott Cutler. Congratulations to you, Michael Cutler, this week's Listener of the Week. I don't think Michael has a TV anymore, which I love. You know, my brother-in-law and co-sister-in-law are coming in from California to spend a week with us tomorrow. Or today. And they're staying in my office, which is why I had to clean it. And they, my wife says, hey, can you take the television set that's in the basement that I had set up for the ping pong tournament and put it into your office? I said, do we really need to do that? Because there's already 2 radios in there. And she said yes. Looked at me like I was crazy and said yes. So Michael Cutler's a guy that if we ever hosted him at our house, he would be comfortable with the room with no television set and just the radios. So congratulations to you, Michael Cutler. If you want to send me your picks for bumper music, you can. Frank.Morano at redappleaudionetworks.com. That's Frank.Morano at redappleaudionetworks.com. One quick thing, I just want to correct something that I said. That was my assumption that was a TMZ reporter that shouted that question to George Stephanopoulos. It wasn't. It was a passerby, just a regular passerby, when TMZ just captured it and reported on it. So it was not TMZ reporter shouting it, just a regular person. All right, 646-720-0635. Let me say hello to Maury in Westchester County. Hi, Maury.
Russia loves Biden letting in the third world. Go Buchanan, go. 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 Go Pack, go. Go Pack, go. Go Pack, go.
Thank you, Maury. Really well done. 646-720-0635. 646-720-0635. My wife and I, we made the most of our 3-day weekend last weekend. We got to see not just the movie that I mentioned yesterday, but we got to see the new Julia Louis-Dreyfus movie, which is called You Hurt My Feelings. And it was really interesting. I didn't know anything about it, and my wife started to tell me about it. And I actually prefer to go into a movie cold. I prefer trying to go in with as little expectations as possible, because otherwise, honestly, whatever film you see, you end up being colored by the expectations of the film itself. I didn't know what to expect. I like Julia Louis-Dreyfus, but she's been in some stuff that I've seen that I haven't been crazy about. It's about a writer who's married to a psychiatrist. And it's about their relationship, and it's about the lives of a lot of people around them. Julia Louis-Dreyfus plays the star, Beth, and the male lead is Tobias Menzies. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Who I kept thinking looked just like a young Tommy Lee Jones. But my wife disagreed. She didn't see it at all. And here's a little bit of the trailer to You Hurt My Feelings.
What kind of story were you thinking about, Hal?
Something in a prison.
Oh, all right. And what about a prison interests you?
Jail?
For sure.
Happy anniversary.
We're so lucky.
Yeah.
So, Elliot tells me you're a writer.
In your last one, it should have done better.
There's lots of new voices. Refugees, cancer, murder, abuse.
I'm an old voice.
You're the best voice.
Maybe if Dad hadn't just been verbally abusive, it would have been a bestseller.
Don't say that.
Your memoir was great. Your new book is great.
How are you?
Feeling a little off my game.
The only reason she makes me a salad is because she wants me to lose weight, which is passive-aggressive.
I want you to be healthy.
Doesn't matter.
Can you shut up and keep talking?
Don, you want to intervene here? We can do this at home.
Leave him alone. He looks tired.
I made you.
What are you, nuts?
You get Botox?
Well, I just get a little bit right here. You know, I can still move my eyebrows. Watch.
It's so expressive.
Look. Come on, we'll go sneak up on him.
Can you say anything?
No, I can't. It feels too late.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I think I'm gonna throw up.
Okay, right here?
No, I don't think I can. I can't.
Going back.
If I did say that, you took it out of context.
Are you gonna gaslight me now?
He's been lying to me this whole time.
I wasn't lying. I was encouraging.
That's not true. You were lying to be encouraging.
You know what? As an actor, Mark isn't always great. So the times when you don't think he's good, what do you say to him? You were so fantastic.
Really?
Mom, you're always expecting the best from me.
You're welcome.
I just need to do something meaningful.
What you do is kind of meaningful.
To who?
No one.
This whole world is falling apart, and this is what's consuming you.
Mom, you're not helping.
I love you.
Oh, okay, well, then never mind.
I have to tell you, I absolutely love this picture. I thought it was very smart. I thought it was very entertaining. I thought it was unpredictable. I thought the acting performances were great. I thought it was technically superb. I thought it was different from a lot of movies that come out these days, and I really enjoyed it. My wife did too. And I heard her laughing, obviously, as we were watching it together. She thought the ending was a little anticlimactic, and I can understand why she said that, but I liked it. I thought it did a fine job. I really think if you've ever been a husband or a wife or a sister or a brother-in-law or an adult child or the parent of an adult child, if you've ever been any of those things, or in therapy or a therapist or a writer or a teacher, I really think you'll relate to the characters in this film. And I really think you'll relate to a lot of the situations in the film that the characters find themselves in. It struck me as very true to life. And, you know, it has you asking a lot of questions about how you should handle your own relationships. What do you do? What's the line between being dishonest and being supportive? You know, if you get a gift you don't like, should you say you don't like it? That's just one of the many kind of ethical quandaries that film makes you think about. So I really enjoyed it. It's called You Hurt My Feelings. It's available on streaming. I've lost track of what network all these. I think it's Amazon Prime, but it was I thought really well done. I can't say enough good things about it, so I'll recommend it. All right, 646-720-0635. Oh, I was talking about Miss Lawful Sanders, who I believe was wrongfully fired by that radio station, WURD. And here she was announcing her resignation on Instagram.
Hello, beautiful people. I wanted to come here and share with you that effective immediately, I am no longer an on-air host at WURD. I tendered my resignation yesterday.
Oof. I feel bad for her. I really do. All right. What do you think? 646-720-0635. Let me say hello to Larry in Brooklyn. Hi, Larry.
Yeah, okay. She didn't sound particularly impressive, her voice to begin with, but that's not the issue. As far as her firing goes, that's like analogous to saying that John Gotti should not have killed his top lieutenant for turning state's evidence. I mean, he's John Gotti. I mean, these stations are a conspiracy to protect Biden. It's obvious. Even Trump was saying it. He was saying this is everybody was in on it. He was saying, and when he meant everybody, he meant everybody, media, all the Democrats. So we're just seeing a corrupt radio station trying to protect itself by taking it out on their employee. Of course, it's wrong, but look at who's doing it.
Yeah, I think I still think you got to stick up for your people, at least to some extent. And they didn't do that here. They totally threw her under the bus. But your point's well taken, Larry. I mean, aside from the John Gotti analogy, which I think is ridiculous and grasping at straws and just trying to get a reaction out of me. But a reaction you will not get. We will continue with your calls in a moment. 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
2 little men in a flying saucer flew down to Earth one day. Looked to left and right of it, couldn't stand the sight of it, and said, let's fly away. They took a look at a Western movie. Somebody heard them say, if a horse can be a star, think how dumb the people are, we'd better fly away. Then they shook their little green antennas, scratched their purple hair, said this planet is an awful menace, let's go back to
2 Little Men in a Flying Saucer by the great Ella Fitzgerald. This is a selection from our outgoing listener of the week, Roger in Massachusetts, who performed his duties admirably and made this show proud. Hopefully, Michael Scott Cutler can do just as well in the role for this week. 646-720-0635. A lot of you eager to comment. Let me squeeze in as many of you as we can here. Jimmy on Staten Island. Hey, Jimmy.
Hi, Frankie. Nice to talk to you. Your screen call is a mensch. I just want listen. I've been listening.
I hope you
tonight.
wished him a happy birthday yesterday.
Well, happy birthday! I'll send an envelope in the mail. Frank,
Thank you.
You said so much. You said so much on this that my head's going wild. But let me just get a couple of things out, and then you could lambast me. All right. Now, they fired this poor woman who was given the answers, the questions to this other patient in the White House. Now, here's what happens. Down in Brazil, did she get fired for giving the other one the answers? Hillary Clinton?
Yes, she did.
All right. She did get fired?
Yes.
All right. Well, I saw her on Fox News. I guess they just move around their garbage, whatever. And the other thing is, Frank, are we going to, no, when I say we, I don't mean you and I, but are they going to start now with this Russia?
Yes. Oh, that's why I'm mentioning it. You're going to hear nothing but that Frank, from now till November.
Frank, as a guy, a layman that you pretty much know from in the street and seeing you at book signings and jewelry stores, I think I could speak for many. We're so burnt out with this garbage, and we know what the media is all about. The king has no clothes. That Biden was exactly who the hell he was on that debate stage. All of a sudden, the next day, he came out red as fire, screaming like a lunatic. The teleprompters were down his throat. We don't want to hear. I mean, me talking for a lot of people, especially Staten Islanders, we're tired. Get this. He ain't going anywhere, so let him stay where he is. Kamala Harris, she gets confused with Ziploc bags. You can't put her anywhere. This guy has to stay in, and he did not write that letter, Frank.
No, I know, but, he still, owns that letter. I mean, it's not unusual for a president to have somebody else write a letter. Jimmy, thank you. I appreciate the call and the comments and the enthusiasm. I know people like to rag on Kamala Harris, and I understand the criticisms, and I wouldn't vote for her, but I think Harris is a much stronger candidate than Biden. I mean, much stronger, for reasons that I've gone into before. But I think, honestly, I think everybody is a stronger candidate than Biden. Biden, if you're a swing voter, if they're the handful that exist in this country, how do you look at that guy during the debate and say, yeah, okay, that's the guy that should be making decisions about whether we launch nuclear weapons or not? I mean, come on. Say what you want about Harris. She's far from perfect. You're not going to question whether she's cognitively functional. And that's the question I think a lot of people have about Biden these days. Your influence counts. Use it.
This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
Well, in an era where there is one shocking moment in media after another, the world was shocked over the weekend to learn that after more than 23 years, pro wrestler John Cena is preparing to step in the ring for the last time. There was a pay-per-view event. I don't even know if they still call them pay-per-views, but there was a big event that the WWE does called Money in the Bank in Canada on Saturday. And there was a surprise appearance from John Cena. Now, John Cena, you're probably familiar with him. He probably, unlike anyone aside from The Rock, has been able to make the transition from the world of pro wrestling to mainstream stardom. He's a big actor now, and he's a movie star. He's a genuine, bona fide, honest-to-God movie star, but he still dabbles in pro wrestling from time to time. He is a 16-time world champion. I think that's the record. So he, by the way, started to get big right around the time that I stopped watching wrestling obsessively. I was sort of on my way out watching wrestling right around the time that he was coming in, about 23 years ago. But obviously I followed it from a distance, and I appreciated his contributions to the world of sports entertainment. So he announced at the event on Saturday that he was retiring. This is courtesy of the WWE. on Saturday night, their Money in the Bank event.
Tonight, I officially announce my retirement from the WWE.
He did say, though, that he's going to have one last match, and it's going to be at this year's or next year's WrestleMania.
The 2025 Elimination Chamber will be my last. And I'm here tonight to announce that in Las Vegas, WrestleMania 2025 will be the last WrestleMania I compete in.
Obviously I'm I have mixed feelings about this because whenever there's a wrestler from when I used to watch wrestling that retires, like a Sting or a Ric Flair, I feel a little bit less connected to what's going on now because I don't know a lot of the new wrestlers that well. And, but on the other hand, I'm glad that he's retiring while he's still able to perform really well. One of the saddest things in pro wrestling, the similarities between the world of pro wrestling and talk radio are endless. And there are so many cases in wrestling that I could point to of pro wrestlers that stayed way too long. And in doing so, damaged their legacy. And because you then had a whole generation of fans who only knew them as people that were lame. You have all these wrestlers that stay way past their prime. But John Cena is not one of them. I think, he doesn't compete that much anymore, but he's somebody that is still very much in his prime and somebody that can compete at a top level. And I'm glad he's leaving while he's still able to do that. So I think that's nice. So I'm wishing him the best of luck. And there's something always so special about WrestleMania whenever it's so-and-so's last match. And there have been so many WrestleManias over the years where it's some big star's last match. And sometimes they come back, as in the case of Ric Flair. Other times they don't. But I thought, I think that's going to be very interesting. I'm looking forward to watching that. What about you, Matt? Any thoughts on John Cena announcing his retirement?
I wasn't surprised. For some reason, everybody's so surprised at this. He's talked about it before, maybe a couple of months ago when he was at they don't call pay-per-views anymore. They're premium live events.
Premium live events. Okay.
So he did say something like it's coming. So when he came out, it was a surprise. I did watch Money in the Bank. And he said that he's kind of going to do like a tour. Pretty much, he's going to go on a tour with the WWE and wrestle in different places. So he said in that clip, you heard him say the Elimination Chamber will be his last. Then he said WrestleMania, but I think he said Survivor Series and a couple other pay-per-views.
This is it's his farewell tour.
So he can wrestle this person and that person and whatever on his last leg. I don't think he's going to be one of those guys that says this is it and then 3 years later, he's going to have another match.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I completely agree just because, among other things, he got so much going on. I mean, he was at the Academy Awards running around naked this year.
That's right.
And so, I mean, I don't know of many other wrestlers that can claim, I don't know of any other wrestlers that can claim that they were naked at the Academy Awards. So, I mean, he is one of the biggest movie stars there is right now.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, nobody else besides John Cena and The Rock as a wrestler made the transition into movies, except they are like, oh, it's Stone Cold Steve Austin in a movie. He's still like wrestler. People always still think of him as a wrestler. Even Kevin Nash is in movies, and you don't even know it's Kevin Nash because he doesn't look the same because he's older, he's got gray hair. But Hulk Hogan never made the transition as movie star. He's always going to be the wrestler. The Rock, people don't even realize that he was a wrestler.
Right.
At this
I know.
point.
John Cena, same thing.
And Cena's the same way because he's been around so long. And I think it'll be nice to watch him and be fun. He even said in the press conference that they have after the pay-per-view or the PLA about how everything's gone. Like he's retiring the whole uniform, because they asked him, are the jorts going to be retired? Because, he wears those jean shorts. And he goes, just as they're coming back in style, yes, I'm retiring everything. You will see me in another role with WWE, but I will be wearing a suit and tie.
Well, he's probably going to do one of those legends roles like Jesse Ventura talked to us about, like he's going to be doing. That's what I would imagine. So we'll see. I wish him the best of luck. Not that he needs luck from me. All right. Here is a story which I should find despicable. This is a story that should earn the people behind it a denunciation. Despicable is a bit of a strong word. But I have to tell you, there is something that I appreciate about this story. Protesters in Barcelona, Spain, these particular protesters were not crazy and are not crazy about the tourists. And they let the tourists know loudly that they did not at all appreciate what tourism is doing to Barcelona. And the reason I say that I should hate this is because, I'd love to visit Barcelona one day and I would be a tourist. And it's tourism that keeps countries like Spain and places like Barcelona wealthy, right? I mean, they make an enormous amount of money from tourism. So for these protesters to go crazy over tourists, it's sort of like you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. But sure enough, protesters in Barcelona have sprayed visitors with water as part of a demonstration against mass tourism. Demonstrators marching through areas popular with tourists on Saturday chanted, "Tourists go home," and squirted them with water pistols, while others carried signs with slogans including "Barcelona is not for sale." Thousands of protesters took to the streets of the city in the latest demonstration against mass tourism in Spain, which has seen similar actions in the Canary Islands, decrying the impact on living costs and quality of life for local people. And I get it. I get where they're coming from. It does hurt the quality of life to some extent. It does increase costs. So the demonstration was organized by a group of more than 100 local organizations, and they were not at all happy with these tourists. Here's a little bit of what was going on in Barcelona. And they're shooting them with water pistols. Not water cannons, just water pistols. So tourism is very much a double-edged sword for cities like Barcelona, for cities like New York. I'm sure for every city. Because according to official figures, almost 26 million visitors made an overnight stay in the Barcelona region last year. That's in 1 year, 26 million visitors. And their spending was $13.8 billion. That's an enormous amount of money pumped in to the Spanish economy. However, what these demonstrators are saying is that the visitors increase prices, they put pressure on public service, and the profits from the tourism industry are unfairly distributed and increase social inequality. Look, it's terrible what they did, and tourism is a great thing for a community that gets to enjoy it, but I get it. I mean, there are people that say the same thing about tourists in New York, that tourism is eating New York alive, where you have these people who, and I like tourism. I think it brings a lot of money into the city. I just don't love catering exclusively to tourists, creating these tax-exempt corporations, where we spend millions of dollars solely to appeal to tourists. I would never shoot them with water guns, and I encourage people to come here. But I do understand why people get a little fed up with tourism. And this is really more of a pre-pandemic thing, but it's not just the overcrowding, right? It's the way mainstream tourists consume. They spend money only on the safe and the familiar. What Jeremiah Moss from the Vanishing New York blog calls imports from their own civilization, meaning they spend it on chain restaurants that they have in their community, not local New York institutions, right? They help to leech New York of some of the more unique aspects of it. And instead, and this could be true of Vegas as well, and we're on in K-Dawn now. When I was in Las Vegas about 3 years ago, and I'm hoping to go back in 2 years, although maybe we'll go back for this WrestleMania that's going to be there, but we'll see. In Vegas, there are fewer and fewer places that were indicative of old Vegas. Everything is becoming more like a shopping mall, right? Even in New York, for instance, and I think this is probably true in other cities, even some of the edgy neighborhoods, they have chain restaurants and stores that you find in every community. Applebee's in Times Square, 7-Eleven in the East Village, Patagonia on the Bowery. And that's where tourists flock. Why would anyone come to New York to shop and eat in the same places they could find at their local mall back home? That's kind of what kills me about tourism. It's great and they bring in a lot of money, but it's just, I feel like we lose a little bit of something going out of our way to cater to them. And so I understand I wouldn't squirt any of them with water guns or shout at any of them to go home, but while what they're doing is terrible, I understand it. If that makes sense. I hope it does. 646-720-0635. All right. As promised, yesterday, what day is today? Today's when? I've lost track of the days of the week. I don't remember if it was yesterday or the previous day, but I made a point about how in the United States, our elections are nice, but a lot of the time, the elections don't make a difference. Now, again, I've never missed an election. I voted in every election I've ever been eligible for. And when I say every election, I mean I have voted for Independence Party State Committee. Okay? I voted in every election I've ever been eligible for. The obscure, I vote in elections where they're unopposed, etc. So I'm a voter. That being said, when people say to me something like, our elections don't make any difference, I do think there's an element of the Iranian electoral system here. In Iran, you're not going to get to run for president unless you're approved by the Ayatollah and the mullahs that really run Iran. In the United States, we have our own version of oligarchy. We have our version of the people that will screen you to determine if you can run for president or governor. And the bottom line is, if you can't raise or spend $300 million to $500 million of your money or get other people that have that money to give it to you, you're not going to be a presidential candidate. Can't do it. If you want to run for office, what is the first question any political consultant you go to will ask you? Can you raise the money? Now, it's a little bit different on the local level, but there are still increasing elements of this same thing. I think this was so perfectly articulated by George Carlin in one of his last stand-up specials. And in this stand-up special, I mentioned this yesterday, and I said that I would play it today, and any excuse to play George Carlin, I will. In this stand-up special, George Carlin makes the case about exactly what I just said. Much more articulate than I could ever hope to be. And in this, I want you to listen to it. He's not even really telling jokes. It's really just kind of a monologue. So I really think you should take heed to what he says here. And it really gives you an appreciation for how prescient George Carlin was. He made these remarks that I'm about to play for you almost 20 years ago.
There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting f***ed by a system that threw them overboard 30 years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your f***ing retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this f***ing place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they used to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. And nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich suckers who don't give a about them. They don't give a about you. They don't give a about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Yeah. You know? And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue that's being jammed up their every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.
So I really don't think you could say it much better than that, and especially the aspect where he says there's a big club and you're not in it. That's my view, right? When you see what's going on in foreign policy and the media and healthcare and transportation and aviation and everything, that's really it. There's this group of inside, I was talking earlier about Jeffrey Epstein and the people that he used to hang out with. Those are the people in the club. Everybody else, the system is not designed to work for you. If you can make it work for you, that's great. But by and large, it's designed to work for the people that would hang out with Jeffrey Epstein, primarily. All right, 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. Stu is in Connecticut. Hi, Stu.
Hey, Frank.
Hey.
I enjoy the variety of your program.
Thank you.
Box of chocolates every night.
I appreciate that. That's the idea.
So ironic. I saw the Jesse Ventura interview the other night about how he got elected. I'll make it quick. The interviewer said, "How did you get elected?" He looks at him and goes, "What do you mean, how do they get elected? Votes. Voters." He goes, "There's no parties. They're owned. Each side of the fence is owned by somebody." He goes, they might as well go out there in NASCAR jerseys with stickers all over them
He's made that point to me, and he's exactly right. And it's not just the politicians, though. I would love to see every time you see a retired general or colonel on Fox News or MSNBC telling me what country we should bomb or what country we should pay for bombs for. I want to know what boards are paying them. I want to know who they're being paid by that stands to profit from the wars that they're advocating on television and convincing the American people to get behind.
He was so perfect. I don't know when that interview was present, but that guy, he asked me if he wanted to run for president. He goes, I could be president, but I don't want to do it.
Well, look, I think it might be tougher than Jesse is letting on, but I think he would add a lot to the race. Look, I was hoping Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would pick him, but that's the thing as his running mate. But that's the thing with running for president is if Jesse Ventura was Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s running mate, I think Ventura would be a much better vice president than Nicole Shanahan. But I don't think that Kennedy would be able to get on the ballot in a lot of the states that he's gotten on the ballot in, because they set up so many barriers for outsiders that if his running mate wasn't super wealthy, I don't think he'd be able to get in the ballot in a lot of these states.
Yeah, the RFK, that's a shame. The whole junior thing's a shame.
Yeah.
So on to my point about the interviewer with Biden, Lori, I tried to look her up. She sounded kind of fresh. In terms of her experience in journalism. But I would like to know the timeline from when she got those questions. I don't know. Do you know that?
Well, so I think it was all within 4 days. I think she got the question the day before the interview. Then she did the interview. I think it was on either Thursday of last week. And then I think she was let go, I think either on Friday or Monday.
Now, that's insane. Do you know her credentials? How long she's been in the business?
I don't. I honestly don't know much about her at all.
Yeah, regardless, not important. But you know who should be fired as her supervisor, manager. You're not going into a conference room and reviewing what you're going to say and do during a presidential interview.
Well, I agree with you in that if you're not going to do that, if you're going to leave it to her, then you can't fire her for the decisions that she makes in that interview, right? I mean, I honestly wouldn't want, if I had the opportunity to interview a president, I wouldn't want, our program director or general manager telling me what to ask. I mean, I'd want to trust my own instincts and my own strategies for coming up with a question. But I also would not expect to be fired if I ask or don't ask the questions that they don't want me to ask.
Right.
But
I'm just, like I said, she sounds young in the industry, and that she may look for some help from her upper management to conduct the interview. And
I'd love to know what went on behind the scenes. I'm going to see if I can. I don't know that she's doing any other interviews right now, but I'd love to try and get her on this program and ask her some of those questions. Stu, thank you for the very thoughtful call. All right, 646-720-0635. Noam Laden is here, someone that never gives me the questions that I'm going to ask him as follow-ups to his news stories. Never. That's the God's honest truth. Straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Love this song, McFadden and Whitehead. Ain't no stopping us now. Today, I think, is actually one of their birthdays. Today, actually, I believe it's not McFadden, but Whitehead's birthday today. Yeah. Well, he's no longer with us, but John Whitehead he died 20 years ago, but he would have been, I don't know, he would have been old if he was still around today. Math, that's not my strength. I think this song was also Larry Holmes's Ring entrance theme, at least for a time, although I could be incorrect about that. Although, for some reason, that's in my head. So, how did it get there? Ain't no stopping us now. And there ain't no stopping Noam Laden, who would never be caught using the word ain't.
Stand by for the other side of Midnight's news.
From New York City, the other side of midnight and its affiliated stations present national and international news with Frank Morano and news director Noam Laden. Their summary of the world news and personal comments. Get the rest of the story.
Hello, Noam.
Good morning, Frank. I heard you talking about this reporter out of Philadelphia who was fired from her job. The president, the White House, supplying her with the questions that she then used, almost all of them apparently during her course of interview. By the way, this is common practice that politicians a lot of times will give questions to you ahead of time. And if it's somebody that you want to have a continued conversation with and have access to.
That's exactly what I said.
You do sort of a trade. Right. And I have done this in the past. You'll say, okay, I'll ask you about the blue water program you're trying to sell, but I'm also going to ask you whatever the hell I please.
Right.
And that's how you sometimes can keep those relationships and those lines open because you need them as a reporter. When I worked at City Hall, when Mayor Bloomberg was mayor for a very short time, I was a City Hall reporter. And it was a regular thing that you would trade out questions because there was things I needed to file. I had my news director would say, hey, you need to get the information on this story. And I knew if I didn't get my question in, I wouldn't be able to file that report. So sometimes I would trade out a question. They'd say, hey, if you ask him about, his block party association, I'll let you ask him about whether he wears blue underwear or not.
And that's one of the real shames of her being fired. I mean, maybe there's something else going on. Maybe they found out she was stealing money or whatever else, but it seems like she was fired because she was in the eye of the storm on
Was
this
she a
story.
Journalist or is she just a DJ?
No, I think she's more of a DJ.
Oh, well, then I don't. Yeah, then that's really silly because she probably just
from
took
what I
the
can tell,
questions.
it's a hip hop show. It's a local hip hop show in Philadelphia.
So she might just thought that's standard procedure and she followed along. And to have access to the president, she felt like it was worth it.
A sitting president.
Yeah.
She should not have been fired.
It has been incredibly hot. I don't have to tell you that. It doesn't matter where you are across the country. Most places have been in the 90s, some places in the triple digits. And it is taxing the utility companies. For the most part, they've been handling it pretty well this summer. But interesting program happening in Portland, Oregon. Portland General Electric will soon begin adjusting home temperatures for those enrolled in what's called their smart thermostat program, which gives you credits and potentially financial benefit for lowering the temperature when it gets really hot outside. So Portland, like so many other cities across the country, has had these moments where the demand has been so intense they thought they would lose the power. So if you enroll in this program now, this was not the initial thought of the program. They would voluntarily have you lower the temp. They now will take control of your thermometer during hot portions of the day, especially between 3 and 9 o'clock in the evening when things are really bad, the system's really taxed, and they will lower your thermometer.
That is
Isn't that amazing?
Really interesting.
Yeah.
See, by the way, my sister is in Portland. On Sunday, it was 100 degrees there.
They never see temperatures like that.
No, I mean, it's insane. You go to Portland thinking you're going to get a little bit of coolness.
Of course.
100 degrees. But I would go along with a program like that if I lived alone, but there's no way that my wife would go along with that at all. She likes the temperature, whatever it is that she wants. She would not be slave to whatever the electric company says it should be.
Well, there is the bonus that they can take control of your thermometer on certain days, and it won't be that often because it's not that often that it gets that hot in Portland. But if the system's really taxed, essentially it's like they put their hand on the thermometer, they'll lower it by 3 to 5 degrees. But by the way, that's a lot sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
And because some people like it nice and cool in their house. Now you can manually take it back if you want to. If you do, then you lose out on these potential credits and a lower bill. So that's what you trade off. And so they will start doing this. There hasn't been huge complaints from customers yet because they haven't enacted it yet. But when they do, my guess is you'll hear from some of them.
Yeah, no kidding. Speaking of temperature, I have noticed a complete inability to manage the thermostats in this building effectively by our coworkers.
Yeah.
There are days when I will do some work in the neighboring studio because, someone's in this studio before I start. And when I come in, I'll see that the heat is on.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
I know who it is, by the way.
The heat was on and it was 63 degrees. So it makes no sense. Why would they keep the heat on and have it 63 degrees? And clearly what was happening is that whoever had that setting, they didn't know that the heat was on. They just thought, oh, it's warm in here. Let me make it cooler. And they just kept lowering the temperature to 63 degrees. But the heat is still on. And it says right there, heat.
Yeah.
And I see this, all sorts of stuff like that all over the place.
Well, you can imagine there's 100 people that work potentially in this office during the course of a day, and everybody likes the temperature at a different level. I have people in the news department who come in and they put sweaters on because they can't handle how cool it is. I'm sweating though while they're putting jackets on, so it's always the issue. But there's one person I know who you're talking about. They like it warm. And they don't like air conditioning. And so when they come in every day during their afternoon shift, they raise the temperature up in the control room. And if you go in there, it can feel like it's 80 degrees in there.
Yeah, I am also, well, whatever. I don't want to get into everybody's temperature habits here, but it's annoying. Don't put the heat on and make it 63 degrees.
No, it's summertime. You got to deal with the fact
100 degrees out.
Put a sweater on. More than 3 million people passed through airport security checkpoints on Sunday. That is the largest number ever since they started keeping track at the airports. This is going to be the travel summer, the biggest travel summer ever. Already is easily. They're breaking numbers. They think they will break more numbers before the summer is out. The dollar does really well overseas. That's part of the issue, and people are traveling abroad. Here, the airfares have gone down, not significantly, but enough where people said, hey, that's cheaper than it was last year, which it is by 2, 3, 5%. Orlando, Florida, Honolulu, Miami, and Anchorage, Alaska, the 4 biggest spots where people are going this summer. That's where they're spending their dollars. Overseas, though, that's where you get the deal. The dollar's doing really well against the euro, other monetary forms, and so people are traveling in huge numbers. You must see it if you go onto your Instagram, Facebook. Everybody seems to be outside of the country.
That's true.
Because the dollar is so incredibly strong. Rome, Athens, Punta Cana, the Dominican Republic. Those are the 4 big international travel destinations so far this summer. That could change. Young adults are fueling the travel demand in a big number. Nearly a fifth of Gen Zers are away or planning big trips somewhere overseas this summer.
You're kidding?
No.
A fifth?
Yeah, a fifth.
That I knew they were traveling. I didn't know it was that high.
Yeah, incredible. A church in Tennessee holding a raffle over the July 4th weekend. Did you see this? They gave away an AR-15.
Oh, of course they did.
The River of Tri-Cities Church in Johnson City says the raffle part of a holiday celebration. The pastor there, Tom Holmes, telling us the AR-15 was just one of many giveaways at the church, and he thought it was appropriate, says, is in honor of Independence Day. It is not the first time the church has held a gun raffle. He says the winner does have to pass a background check before they get this AR-15. Members of the congregation, they are no strangers when it comes to firearms. The sign on the door of the church reads, it says, warning in capital letters, This is not a gun-free zone. Again, all in capital letters. We are armed. Any attempt to disrupt or harm will be dealt with in an overwhelming display of force. And now we believe them because they're giving away AR-15s.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Clearly. Wow. Whatever works for them.
Yeah, sure. Parkland mass shooter Nicholas Cruz going to donate his brain to science. This is in a civil settlement with one of his victims. Cruz murdered, you'll remember, 17 students, faculty members at Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High back in 2018. An attorney for 21-year-old Anthony Borges, who was shot 5 times, proposed this unique stipulation. He figured if scientists studied Cruz's brain, they might be able to figure out what created this monster. And so now his brain will be donated to science once he dies. He's still a young guy. He's only 25 years old.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that, but I think that's really creative. I don't know what the brain is going to yield, because I think a lot of these posthumous brain reviews are sometimes kind of anticlimactic. Sometimes they're not. But to the best of your knowledge, have any of these other mass shooters ever had their brain analyzed by science?
Great question. I don't know the answer.
Because a lot of them die, and I would think maybe at least one of their parents would have thought, hey, let's donate their brain to science.
Yeah, and I think you're probably more with it in terms of the fact that it'll be anticlimactic. We won't really learn a whole lot once he does, but why not?
Right, exactly. The wrestler, Chris Benoit, you remember that story 20 years ago? That was really a sad situation, or 18 years ago. Sad situation in that he's a great wrestler, the Canadian Crippler. I was a big fan of his. And he not only, he murdered his wife and child with wrestling moves, and then killed himself. And they found, when they looked at his brain, that he basically had the brain of an 85-year-old. Yeah. He was only 40, and he had the brain of an 85-year-old. And I think we did learn a little something about the trauma to the brain that wrestlers and other fighters might be dealing with. But I'd be curious what, if anything, we'll learn from a mass shooter.
Well, and the same holds true for football players.
Sure,
CTE, brain injuries. Some of them commit really violent crimes, and same thing. When they take a look at their brains afterwards. So I guess maybe there is something to it.
It was either the Washington Post or the New York Times that just did, maybe 5 or 6 months ago, this whole story, complete with video and interviews with the parents of these hockey players, football players, and wrestlers and other athletes who killed themselves or suffered some sort of other death, in part due to CTE. And one of the saddest things I've ever heard is this college athlete, who recorded this video for his parents right before he killed himself.
I saw that story.
And he asked them to donate his brain to medical science. So who knows? I don't know that anybody has said that Mr. Cruz ever experienced some physical brain trauma. But maybe there's something there.
Even long before they were studying the brain in that nature, you'll remember, or maybe you don't, but it was years ago. Howard Cosell, of course, famously one of the big announcers that followed the whole boxing surge in the 70s, I guess late 60s, 70s, or in the early 80s. When he retired from being a broadcaster, one of the biggest things he talked about was we should stop boxing because it's doing so much damage to people's brains. And he was kind of, in some ways, way ahead of his time.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. And, so we'll see. Hopefully we can learn something at some point from that. But, it's a bizarre situation. Thank you, Noam.
Sure.
And now you know the rest of the story.
It was interesting that Noam mentioned the dollar going a lot farther these days, and a lot of people going to Europe because of that. My cousin Andrea, who I've talked about before, she's been a guest on this show once in a while. She is my favorite second cousin, and she is getting married. She just told me over the weekend in Florence, Italy. She's going to get married May of next year, and I'd like to try and go. Honestly, it's tough when at that time we'll have a 3-year-old, right? So it's tough with a 3-year-old to travel anywhere, and obviously it's expensive to make the trip out there. But I'd like to try and go. I think that would be a lot of fun, and I only got to spend a little bit of time in Florence when I was in Italy about 5 years ago, but I found it to be a very impressive city, and like so many cities in Italy, a city with just a tremendously rich culture and history. So I'd like to try and go. I'm a little bummed that I'm going to miss. I think Pat Cooper's widow, Emily, is going to be on this show next week. She's doing this celebration of life at the end of July for what would have been Pat's 95th birthday. And they're doing it in New York at the Italian American Museum in Little Italy. And I'm trying to help her with who to invite and, encourage different folks to go. And it should be a really great event. And I hate to miss that, but we have vacation plans where I'm not going to be in town, but that should be something. She'll tell us about it next week. But Friday, they're basically doing that same thing for Tony LoBianco. And his widow, Elise, was kind enough to invite me to, whatever they're doing for him. But Friday, because my brother-in-law's in town from California, we're all going out to Long Island to see the rest of my wife's family. So I can't really miss that because they're coming all the way in from California for some family time. But sometimes they don't schedule these funerals at the most opportune time. Right? All right. We're going to do 15 seconds of fame in a moment. We're going to give you 15 seconds to say whatever you like. The telephone number is 646-720-0635. One more time, 646-720-0635. We'll do 15 seconds of fame straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
When the lights go down and your dreams go wrong, in the darkness you might need a place to hide. If the days are long, when the sun goes down, you might need a place to call your own. Somewhere out there on the other side of midnight, you might hear a voice of breezing in the grind. Somewhere out there on the other side of midnight.
Ah, yes, The Other Side of Midnight by Stevie G and the Reluctant Tourists. A brilliant song, which we're honored to play on this show on a regular basis. Tomorrow, Brian Kilmeade is going to be here. Also, law professor Barry McDonald, and got some other fun things in store for tomorrow as well. My brakes our brakes are still squeaking. I mean, we've so far spent $1,300 on this car to replace the brake pads and the rotors. So, and honestly, I could drive the rest of my life and the brakes could be squeaking like crazy and I wouldn't even notice. But it's driving my wife crazy. So my goal after I sleep for a couple hours today is go back to this same mechanic shop and give them my car and get them to stop the brakes from squeaking without them charging me another $1,300. And to get the car back in time to pick Carmine up from summer camp. That's a big part of my agenda for today. I also have to finish installing a blind in Carmine's room, which is not going well. I've gotten one of the two brackets up so far, and I almost have the other bracket installed, but in general, I've had to drill way too many holes for this one blind. This is the blind that I broke when I was doing the air conditioner switcheroo. So I got a break yesterday from working on this because the battery in my drill finally died. I said, honey, I'm sorry. Carmine's got to go to bed and I got to charge the drill battery. And Rachel very helpfully said to me, you should charge that every time you use it. I just said, thank you. That's a great idea. All right, so we'll see where that goes. Meantime,
The Other Side of Midnight. This is 15 Seconds of Fame.
646-720-0635. 646-720-0635. Mike.
Morning, Frank. Say what you want about Kamala Harris's ability to govern. If you were choosing the presidential candidates based on who has the best hair, she'd get my vote. It just looks soft and silky, bouncy, and lustrous. Much better than Joe's plugs and Donald's straw wave. If hair was important, like it was to George, Kamala, in for 4, for sure.
David.
If Cody Gifford misses the attention from having his mom mention his name constantly, he needs to marry into the Morano family and his problems will be over. Thanks.
Neil.
You know, Frank, you'd have a very hard time finding a bigger group of hateful, ignorant women than the women on The View.
I'm up for the challenge. Frank.
The Democrats are fighting amongst each other. Biden's brain is barely functional. Obama is powerless. The lefties are doomed. The MAGA revolution is here. We will be victorious. Trump 2024, DeSantis 2028. Ramaswamy 2032.
You got it all figured out. Rusty.
Yeah, Sid was at The View in the Geraldo. All of a sudden, his daughter, this a few years ago, his daughter gets caught in France when the Muslims are shooting up some nightclub. There's no flights in, there's no flights out. Who does he call? He calls Trump, the phony.
Mike.
Hey, listen, Frank, you want to get your brakes fixed? Bring the car to a mechanic.
All right, well, that's what I'm doing. Thank you. Appreciate that. Very helpful. That's about as helpful as the drill advice I got from my wife yesterday. So, well, we'll see. I'll report back tomorrow. Frank Morano, good day.
This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Grainger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.